The Legend of the Axe of Genesee. There is a living rhythm woven into the bones of the universe. It's called Kodost, an ancient power, in every breath, in every blade of grass, older than language, older than science. Few command it, none escape it. On this sphere we inhabit, every being from A100 Primes to A000 seconds is a passenger riding its wave. It is the rhythmic expansion and contraction of the artery of all existence. It is emotional, not verbal. You don't have to chant to use it, but it does listen. It hears anger, pain, passion, joy, fear, confidence, and response. Anointed bloodlines radiate with it. One in hundreds of millions may command it. One such being, an A100 Prime named Philip from Flint, Genesee of the Mitchell clan, patriarch of a bloodline, spoken of in prophecy, the possible living manifestation of an ancient legend called the Axe of Genesee. The prophecy sings cadence of a mystical weapon and its wielder, one destined to change not only the fate of Genesee, but of the entire nation of Magni Maris 5. Prologue: The Quiet Before the Storm. Location: Elixir Corp. Inc. Headquarters: Flint, Genesee, 1978 CE. Second, Wycliffe. The sky over Flint was unusually clear for a Thursday. Not a storm cloud in sight, just the hum of city life, muted by tension. You could feel it in the way people crossed the street, in the way parents tightened their grip on their children's hands. And here, inside the glass-paneled offices of Elixir Corp. Inc., the air carried a quiet pulse like the city was holding its breath. The receptionist's phone rang twice before she picked up. "Good morning, Elixir Corp. Incorporated. How can I help you?" There was a pause, and then a soft voice said, "Give me Dan, will you, Patricia?" She smiled politely. "Oh, hey, Mrs. Mitchell." "Right away." Patricia, a young assistant with sharp glasses and a sharper memory, made her way down the marble hallway in brisk, confident strides. She didn't knock. She knew better. "Your mother's on the line, Mr. Mitchell." Dan looked up from his ledger. The light from his office window glinted off a plaque that read Operations Director, Daniel E. Mitchell. His pressed shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbows, a cup of now cold coffee by his right hand. He picked up the receiver. "Hey, Mom." On the other end of the line, Denise Mitchell exhaled slowly. Her voice was calm, even warm, but carried the weight of too many nights pacing the living room. "Morning, baby. You sleeping at that office again?" Dan sighed and leaned back. "It's either this or watching reports from the Southern Line all night. I'll take my chances with the invoices." Denise chuckled, then grew quiet. There was a beat before she added, "I heard there was another incident in Beecher." Dan stiffened. "I saw. Same pattern, no IDs, blue gear, scrap-grade weapons. Spire boys again. Even the 989th wouldn't be ambitious enough to travel that far south of Clio." Dan nodded. "Exactly. But these aren't the 989th, Ma. They're the rejects, dishonorably discharged, washed out. Soldiers the Northern Army didn't want, and now they're playing war in our backyard." A long pause followed. "Your father would have flattened them already," Denise said, not with pride, but with a tinge of mourning. Dan hesitated. "He's still in the zoo. Nobody's saying it, but I think the Kalamazoo conflict will be ending soon. Too much heat going on down there. The northern lines are collapsing, and the brass wants to cover it up. But we've still got trouble here in Genesee." Denise's voice dropped to a hush. "Your brothers, Al and Falcon." "I know," Dan interrupted. "They're still down in juvenile over that fight in the Auburn corridor. Even with the appeal, I couldn't get their sentence reduced." "I know you tried," she said gently. Dan pinched the bridge of his nose. That no good lawyer of theirs was a waste of company assets. With his chandeliers and fountain lobby, the bastard has the courtroom demeanor of foghorn leghorn. If Falcon had just, doesn't matter now. He exhaled hard. And now with all this Spire Guard talk, if it comes to the city, We'll be ready. We've got the East 3rd Militia," Denise said, though her voice faltered slightly. Dan stared at the glass of the window. The Elixara logo etched into it refracted the morning light like a charm. Outside, kids played. Somewhere across the city, a militia officer was probably scribbling down another warning. Time felt tight. "We sold those guys some sedation elixirs some time ago," he muttered suddenly. "Who?" Denise asked. Dan leaned forward, dropping his voice. "The Spire boys. It was a bulk order. Nothing illegal. Sleep elixirs, anti-aggression blends." She went quiet. "I just found out they've been mixing it into grog for their troops, dosing the men without them knowing, stupefying them into deep submission." Denise hissed through her teeth. "You mean, yeah. It's not war. It's enslavement. Those troops don't know what they're fighting for. They're too dazed to care." A chilling silence followed. "You're doing a great job with the house, Mom," Dan continued. "We still have access to all the company wards and glyphs. If this spreads beyond Beecher, we'll be ready," Denise repeated, firmer this time. "And when your father comes back," Dan shook his head slowly. "If." "No," she said firmly. "When?" Dan closed his eyes, holding the receiver closer to his ear. "We're the Mitchells, Dan. This city was built by families like ours. It'll be defended by us too." He exhaled, the shadow of a smile forming on his lips. "Well, you know me, Mom. I prefer a ledger to a Luger any day." Chapter 1, 2 Days from Trouble. Location: Hasselbach Juvenile Detention Center, State of Genesee, inside Hasselbach, the not-so-scholarly dwelling of the dean's list of creative excuses. The air literally tastes like the failed ambitions of the fatherless, and the daily lunch menu was cold burgers and warm fruit juice, flickering lights, lockstep routines. But somehow, in the heart of that monotony, two brothers carved out a rhythm of their own. Al and Falcon Mitchell weren't just inmates, they were the entity. Known across cell blocks for their quick hands, quicker mouths, and fully stocked commissary, thanks to the Mitchell family's guilt-laced bank account, they didn't rule with brute force, though they had plenty of it. No, they ruled with flavor, cookies for information, ramen for loyalty, a fresh stick of deodorant if you could hold your tongue. But peace only lasts so long. On the final afternoon of their sentence, as orange light poured through the security glass, a clumsy crew of jealous misfits made their move 9 deep, posturing hard in the East Wing corridor just before lights out. Their leader, a wiry kid with too much chin and not enough brain, blocked the path. "Mitchells, you ain't walking out clean. Somebody gotta humble y'all first." Al, arms folded, tilted his head. "Oh, Margaret, are you there? Because if I have to slap a mouth off a wiener-faced teenager again this week, I might qualify for community service credit." Falcon leaned casually against the cinder block wall, thumb hooked in his waistband. "You boys sure you want to do this? The commissary was out of petroleum jelly and skin magazines this week. My brother might be a little pent up," the misfits muttered. One of them spat. Al stepped forward, slow and theatrical. "Let me guess. No family, no friends, and a brain so hollow you hear wind whistling through your thoughts. And now, today of all days, you want to square up with the two guys most likely to be gone before sundown. I don't know whether to pity you or pants you." The lead misfit cracked. A swing came flying. Falcon ducked, smooth as syrup, and shoved him hard into the wall. Al followed with a thundering uppercut to another, sending the poor kid sprawling into the mop bucket. The fight wasn't long, but it was loud and humiliating. Falcon spun one with a sweep kick. Al snatched a second by the hoodie and flung him across the corridor like a sack of onions. His brother then kicked a mop bucket into the chest of one of the misfits. But the finale belonged to Al. After dodging a clumsy lunge from their leader, Al spun him by the arm, pulled down his trousers, bent him over his knee, and delivered 3 sharp, open palm smacks. The corridor echoed like a schoolhouse. "This is for interrupting my countdown to freedom, smack." This is for wasting your poor mother's efforts to raise your sorry ass smack. And this is for thinking a bowl cut gave you power. Falcon whistled. The other misfits scrambled off, groaning, dragging their bruised egos like busted luggage. The boys fixed their shirts. No guards in sight. Time to go. The following morning, the boys were released into the custody of their mother on a probationary period. No trouble, no drugs, and they had to find gainful employment. The terms were laid out by a man that looked like the type of guy who drank his coffee black, with 2 aspirin crushed in the bottom of the mug as Falcon reinserted the laces back into his sneakers. They didn't even get breakfast before getting tossed into the real world. Probation rules were clear. Jobs, curfews, zero nonsense. Denise Mitchell signed for their release, arms crossed, love laced with warning in her voice. You boys even look at trouble the wrong way, you'll be back inside faster than I can scramble eggs. In the visitors' parking lot of the Hasselbach Juvenile Detention Center, Dan Mitchell sat in a Jeep Grand Wagoneer and a Range Rover, waiting for his mother and 2 younger brothers to come out. "Here come the trumpeteers," he exclaimed. "You boys enjoy band camp?" As Al and Falcon jumped in the back seat of the truck. "About as much as a dental appointment in a sandstorm," Falcon replied as he snatched a bag of potato chips out of Dan's hand. "You know, this kind of thing wouldn't happen if you boys came to work with me at Elixir Corp. I don't want to spend the day waving my magic wand around your mystical gaggle of elves," Al sarcastically replied. Denise turned around and scowled at Al. "Sorry, Mom," he replied. Then Denise said, "How about some burgers? You boys must be hungry. There's a Mickey D's right up here on Atherton Road." Falcon smiled. It'd be good to get a burger that's actually warm and a soda that's actually cold. They pulled into the restaurant parking lot. As Denise and Dan sat and watched, Al and Falcon scoffed down burgers, fries, and milkshakes with the discipline of hyenas at a feeding trough. "Well, we've got to find you boys some work," Denise said. "What are we supposed to do with our particular set of skills, Mom?" Falcon replied. "I notice a now hiring sign down at the Circle Drive lumber yards," Dan replied. "Are you kidding?" Al uttered, "Breaking sticks with other sticks? What are we, savages?" "No, you're parolees," Dan replied as he slowly stood up, gently grabbing his mother by the arm. "It's right down the road. Those are some nice shoes, boys. Hope they don't fail you." As he and Denise walked out of the restaurant. So, they walked. Past shuttered gas stations and cracked sidewalks, past the crumbled bricks of old bowling alleys and the ghosts of what Genesee used to be, all the way to Circle Drive lumber yards, where the smell of sawdust clung to the air like smoke. The office door creaked. Inside, a bald man with tattoos across his knuckles looked up from a clipboard. "You're the Mitchell boys, right, Al Ann? Foreskin?" Falcon blinked. "Falcon." Al raised his hand. "And I'm Regret, short for You'll regret hiring me." The man snorted. "Name's Doyle. I hate small talk and late starters." "What you good at?" Al shrugged. "Fighting. Lifting heavy things. Pretending I'm not incredibly overqualified for manual labor." Doyle grinned. "Honest. I like that." "Can you handle a long shift in the sun?" Falcon answered for both. "We've been in juvie. Sun's an upgrade." Doyle reached for 2 time cards. "You boys start in the morning." Al blinked. "Wait, seriously? That's it? You want a parade?" Doyle grunted. "We stack, we saw, we load. You don't steal, don't fight, don't show up high, and you get paid." Al turned to Falcon. "Wow. And I thought sarcasm would delay the process." Falcon smirked. "You're slipping, bro." The door shut behind them as they stepped back into the Genesee air-free men, probation papers in their pockets, and callous futures waiting to be earned. Chapter 3. In the city of Clio, Genesee, in the heart of the nation of Magni Maris 5, an iniquitous force gathered by the thousands on South Mill Street. They moved like a plague of locusts, thousands of them, spilling from alleyways and abandoned buildings in their makeshift uniforms. Hooded cloaks over denim jackets, leather gauntlets gripping rifles and blades. Some carried military surplus weapons, others brandished hammers and machetes. What united them wasn't their gear, it was the hollow look in their eyes. The kind of emptiness that comes from being beaten into submission until obedience becomes instinct. The Clio Spire Guard had started small during the middle of the Kalamazoo conflict. A few ruthless men preying on a city drained of its defenders. But desperation breeds like wildfire when fed by weakness. They recruited the forgotten street kids with nowhere to go, unemployed factory workers with nothing to lose. Those who refused, well, refusal became impossible after the first few lessons. Now they own Clio, and tonight they were expanding their kingdom. Commander Vors Tellic stood in the shadows of the lumberjacks supermarket, watching his men prepare. Unlike the rabble under his command, Tellic retained the bearing of a real soldier, crisp posture, calculated movements, eyes that missed nothing. He'd been dishonorably discharged from the 989th Northern Genesee for excessive interrogation techniques. The guard welcomed such expertise. "Gethin," he called softly. The subordinate guard captain emerged from the darkness. Gethin Mine was an ominous figure. He desired deeply to please his master. His face bore the scars of a dozen street fights, but his expression remained eerily calm. He was one of Tellic's favorite instruments, blunt, effective, and utterly without conscience. "The usual drill," Tellic continued. "Supplies first, recruitment second, examples third." He paused, studying the lit windows of the store. The night manager's name Patterson, 63 years old. Been working there since before the war. He'll try to be a hero. Gethin nodded, slowly. "And the others?" "There's a stock boy, maybe 14. Good age for training. The cashier." Tellic shrugged. "Use your judgment." Inside the lumberjack, old Mr. Patterson was trying to act normal. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he supervised the evening restocking, pretending he hadn't seen the shadows gathering in the parking lot. Beside him, Tommy, barely out of middle school and working to help his mother pay rent, struggled to lift a case of canned goods. "Just keep working, son," Patterson whispered. "Maybe they'll move on." At the front register, Sarah, 19 and saving for community college, watched the doors with growing dread. She'd heard the stories from Beecher. Entire families vanishing, young men pressed into service, women who'd rather not speak of their experiences. The automatic doors exploded inward. Gethin Mine didn't bother with subtlety. He grabbed the metal frame and ripped it clean from its housing, tossing the mangled doors into the parking lot like discarded toys. Behind him, a wave of blue-cloaked figures poured through the opening. "Evening, folks," Gethin called pleasantly, as if greeting neighbors at a block party. "We're here for supplies, nothing personal." He strolled down the center aisle, his boots crunching on scattered glass. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on his scarred face as he casually selected items. A package of cupcakes here, a package of lunch meat there. He ate the cupcakes like a child at a birthday party, frosting smearing across his chin. Around him, the guard worked with practiced efficiency. They'd done this before. Canned goods, dried meat, medicine, anything useful went into canvas sacks. Anything fragile got smashed for sport. Patterson stepped forward, his voice trembling but determined. "Please, these people don't deserve this. Take what you need and go." Gethin paused mid-bite, cupcake wrapper crinkling in his hand. He turned slowly, studying the old man with the casual interest of a cat watching a mouse. "You know what I admire about you people?" Gethin said, discarding the wrapper. "You still believe in deserving things. Like fairness is some kind of natural law." He grabbed a wine bottle, examined the label with mock sophistication, then smashed the neck against a shelf. Dark liquid splashed across the floor. "But here's the thing about deserving," he continued, raising the broken bottle to his lips and drinking deeply. Wine ran down his chin, mixing with cupcake frosting. "It's got nothing to do with getting—" The old man's face went pale, but he held his ground. "I've got grandchildren, son, please." "Huh?" Gethin corrected gently. Then his hand shot out, fingers wrapping around Patterson's throat. The crack echoed through the store like a gunshot. Tommy screamed. Sarah sobbed. The guard kept working. Gethin wiped his hands on his cloak and turned to the boy. "How old are you, Junior?" The kid could barely speak through his tears. 14, sir." "Perfect age for learning. You're coming with us." Gethin gestured to two guards who moved to flank the boy. "Don't worry, we'll teach you everything you need to know about deserving." As Tommy was dragged away, Gethin's attention settled on Sarah. She pressed herself against the register, shaking uncontrollably. "Now, what am I going to do with you?" he mused. Two blue semi-trucks roared into the parking lot, backing directly through the shattered entrance. The guard began loading their plunder with military precision cases of food, medical supplies, anything of value. Within minutes, the store was stripped bare. Tellic appeared at Gethin's shoulder. "Time to go. We've got 3 more stops before dawn." As the convoy prepared to roll south toward Beecher, Gethin took one last look around the devastated store. An old man's blood pooling on linoleum. A boy's childhood ending in the back of a truck. A young woman learning that the world was far crueler than she'd ever imagined. "Just another Tuesday," he said to no one in particular, and walked out into the night. Behind them, the lumberjacks stood hollow and broken, a testament to what happened when good people tried to reason with monsters. And somewhere to the south, in the city of Flint, the Mitchell family rested uncomfortably, well aware of the possibility that their city might change forever. Directly south of the devastation at Farmer Jack, 2 figures crouched in the skeletal remains of what had once been Beecher's pride, the old Chevrolet plant. Rust and broken glass crunched beneath their boots as Lester and David Breed positioned themselves behind a collapsed section of assembly line, binoculars trained on the convoy of blue trucks rolling through the city's main thoroughfare. Lester was the older of the two, a former tool and die maker whose callous hands now gripped a military surplus rifle instead of precision instruments. His weathered face bore the kind of lines that came from squinting through factory smoke for 30 years. Beside him, David Breed, barely 22 and still lean from his days running cross-country at Flint Central, adjusted his position with the nervous energy of youth trying to prove itself. "Count again," Lester whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant rumble of engines. David lowered his binoculars and consulted the notebook he'd been scribbling in for the past 3 hours. 17 trucks since midnight. Each one loaded heavy. Could be supplies, could be recruits. Hard to tell from this distance. "Both," Lester muttered grimly. "I've seen this playbook before. Back in '73, when the Yacktown crews tried to muscle into Fenton. Same pattern, hit fast, recruit locals, consolidate, then push outward. They'd been sent here by Sergeant Norvell Stern 3 days ago, with explicit orders, observe and report. The East 3rd Militia wasn't large enough to take on an army, and Beecher wasn't their territory anyway. But Stern was nobody's fool. He'd seen the writing on the wall when the first refugees started trickling into Flint, telling stories of blue-cloaked raiders and missing family members. "Movement," David breathed, pointing toward a cluster of abandoned storefronts across the street. A group of figures emerged from what had once been a hardware store, dragging something between them. In the pale moonlight, Lester could make out the distinctive blue cloaks of the Clio Spire Guard, but these weren't the disciplined soldiers they'd observed earlier. These moved with the jerky, uncoordinated gait of the recently recruited local kids, probably still learning to march in formation. "Fresh meat?" Lester observed coldly. "Look at how they're stumbling. Probably grabbed them yesterday." David's jaw tightened as he watched the young recruits being herded toward a converted school bus. Some couldn't have been older than his little brother. We should follow orders," Lester cut him off, though his own knuckles were white around his rifle grip. Stern was clear. "We're not here to play hero." They spent a considerable amount of time watching the systematic dismantling of Beecher. The Guard operated with military precision, dividing the city into sectors and clearing them methodically. Useful buildings were marked with blue paint. Unusable structures were torched. Anyone of fighting age was either recruited or removed. The elderly and very young simply disappeared. As dawn approached, David noticed something that made his blood run cold. "Lester, look at the eastern checkpoint." Through his binoculars, Lester could see guard units setting up what looked like a staging area. Maps were spread across makeshift tables. Officers, real officers, not the street thugs they'd been observing, pointed toward various positions and gave orders to runners who dispersed quickly into the surrounding urban scape. "Son of a bitch," Lester breathed. "They're not just occupying Beecher, they're using it as a forward base." David's pen moved frantically across his notebook. Staging area established. Command structure visible. Multiple units being dispatched. Due south, toward Flint. A new convoy approached from the north, this one different from the supply runs they'd been tracking. These vehicles were military grade, painted in the same blue as the guards' cloaks, but bearing the crisp organization of professional warfare. At the head of the convoy, a figure emerged from a command vehicle that David recognized from intelligence briefings. "Holy shit," he whispered. "That's Tellic." Commander Vors Tellic strode through the staging area with the bearing of a man surveying his kingdom. Even from a distance, his presence was unmistakable the way other guards straightened when he passed, the deference shown by officers who had commanded hundreds of men. This wasn't a raid anymore. This was an invasion. Lester grabbed David's shoulder. "We've seen enough. Time to go." They began their careful retreat through the plant's ruins, moving in the practiced silence that Stern had drilled into every militia member. But as they reached the rear exit, David couldn't resist one last look through his binoculars. What he saw made his heart stop. A line of vehicles stretched from the staging area south toward the horizon, not the hodgepodge collection of stolen trucks and commandeered buses they'd been observing, but a proper military column. Armored personnel carriers, supply trucks, even what looked like artillery pieces mounted on flatbed trailers. "Lester," David's voice cracked. "Look at this." The older man took the binoculars and studied the scene for a long moment. When he lowered them, his face had gone ashen. "How many?" David asked. "Thousands," Lester replied quietly. "Maybe 10,000, maybe more." He looked at his young companion with the kind of expression reserved for delivering terminal diagnoses. "This isn't a raid, kid. This is a war." Asterisk. 2 days later, East 3rd Militia Headquarters, Flint, asterisk. The basement of Hardy's Auto Repair had been converted into something resembling a command center, though command was generous for an operation run on donated radios and hand-drawn maps. Sergeant Norvell Stern stood behind a scarred wooden table, studying the intelligence reports that Lester and David had delivered just moments earlier. Stern was a compact man in his 50s, built like a fire hydrant and twice as sturdy. He'd served 2 tours in Inkster before returning to work the line at the auto factory, and when the Kalamazoo conflict had drained Flint of its regular military presence, he'd stepped up to organize the city's defense. The East 3rd Militia was his creation, a grassroots force of factory workers, shop owners, and teenagers too young for the draft but old enough to hold a rifle. "Tell me again about the staging area," Stern said, not looking up from the maps. Lester cleared his throat. "Professional setup, Sarge. Command tents, communication equipment, the works. This isn't some gang that got lucky. Somebody's bankrolling them. Numbers? Conservative estimate? 8 to 10,000. Could be more arriving every day." David Breed shifted uncomfortably in his folding chair. "Sergeant, there's something else. The way they moved, the equipment they had. Some of those vehicles look military." Stern's head snapped up. "Military? I can't be sure, but the markings on some of the trucks, they look like MM5 surplus. The kind of stuff that doesn't just fall off the back of a train." The room fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of evening traffic. Stern walked to the window and stared out at the darkening streets of Flint, his city, his responsibility. "How long?" he asked finally. Lester consulted his notes. Based on their logistics pattern and the size of their forward base, 2 weeks, maybe less. 2 weeks to prepare for thousands of hostiles. Stern turned back to face his men, and for the first time since they'd known him, he looked genuinely worried. The 31st MM5 won't be back from Kalamazoo for who knows how long. Maybe longer if the situation down there deteriorates further. David leaned forward. What about the other cities? Grand Blanc, Burton, Davison? They've got to be seeing the same intelligence we are. Even if they are, we can't count on help. Stern moved to a wall map peppered with colored pins. Each city's got its own problems, own priorities. When push comes to shove, we're on our own. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a shroud. The East 3rd Militia numbered maybe 3,000 on a good day, counting the teenagers and the old-timers who probably shouldn't be holding weapons. Against thousands of trained fighters with military equipment, they weren't a defense force, they were a speed bump. So what do we do? Lester asked. Stern studied the map for a long moment, his finger tracing the routes between Beecher and Flint. We do what every defender does when the odds are against them, he said finally. We make them pay for every inch. He turned to face his reconnaissance team, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that had held the line in Inkster and kept the peace in Flint for 3 years. Get word to any family with military-age sons, if any. Tell them what's coming. Give them the choice to leave or stay and fight. He paused, looking each man in the eye. As Lester and David prepared to leave, Stern called out one final order. And boys, start digging trenches, lots of them. Outside, the streets of Flint looked peaceful in the evening light. Children played on sidewalks while their parents tended gardens and washed cars. Normal life continuing in blissful ignorance of the storm approaching from the north. But in windows throughout the city, militia families were already beginning to pack their most precious belongings, making the hardest choice any parent could face: run and live or stay and die for the place they called home. The war for Flint was imminent. The preparation began tonight. At that moment, in the city of Beecher, Captain Frank Fronton of the Clio Spire Guard, flanked by Gethin Mine, stood before 3 A5 Guard members. He pulled out a silver flask, unscrewed the top, and handed it to them. Please, take a seat. Unburden yourselves. Take a second to gather in all we've accomplished here. The 3 guardsmen took gulps from the flask, glancing around. Fronton pointed to the one in the center. I know you're Howard, right? But you too. I have your names on the tip of my tongue, but I seem to have swallowed it. Remind me again. I'm Nick, one said. I'm Carson, said the other. Of course you are, Fronton replied. He caught a glimpse of Vors Tellic from the corner of his eye, gazing at a scroll from the Cedar Street Temple in Alphason. Fronton refocused on the guards before him. I'm going to reward you boys for all your faithful service with a very special assignment, he said. You're going to move forward to Flint. When you get there, head straight to the unemployment office. Take up jobs wherever you can. Bring a few of your friends with you. You boys will be my eyes and ears. I want you to get familiar with the pulse of the city. Tell me about its ups. Tell me about its downs. Keep a lookout for weaknesses in the wall and, especially, potential talent. Think you can handle that for me? Yes, sir. They all said in unison. Good. Very good. Fronton handed them a large wad of cash and several sets of keys to different vehicles. Now, move along. I want you in Flint the day before yesterday. As soon as you touch down, give me a buzz. Part 4, Chapter 3. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Circle Drive lumberyard as Al and Falcon Mitchell hauled their third pallet of 2x4s toward a waiting pickup truck. Sweat beaded on their foreheads despite the early hour, and sawdust clung to their work shirts like a second skin. It had been a week since their release from Hasselbach, and the rhythm of honest labor was starting to feel almost natural. Al hefted a board and tossed it onto the truck bed with practiced ease. You know what the worst part about this job is? The splinters? Falcon grunted, wrestling with a particularly heavy piece of oak. The fact that I'm actually getting good at it. Al wiped his hands on his jeans. Pretty soon I'll be able to stack lumber in my sleep. Better than stacking time in a cell, Falcon reminded him. Or counting beans with Dan at Elixir Corp, Al replied. Their boss, Doyle, emerged from the office trailer, clipboard in one tattooed hand and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. His bald head gleamed in the morning light as he surveyed their work with the critical eye of a man who'd spent 30 Wyclin in construction. Hey, Al, he called out. You're doing too good of a job. I'm supposed to regret hiring you, remember? Al grinned without missing a beat. Don't worry there, Doily. You'll get your chance. Doyle laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his gruff features. He clapped Falcon on the shoulder as he passed. All right, Regret and Foreskin, you boys got a break coming up. Might as well start it now. Al's smile widened. You know, for such a raging hard-on, you sure got a sweet spot. And for such a lackluster smartass, you sure got a work ethic, Doyle shot back, already heading toward the next crew. Don't spend all your money in one place. The brothers headed across the street to Murphy's Corner Store, a small establishment that had been serving the working men of Circle Drive for as long as anyone could remember. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and Al immediately took inventory of the scene, a habit Philip had drilled into him during those brief furloughs home. Behind the counter stood Mahmoud, the Middle Eastern clerk who'd been running the place since the previous owner retired. He was the kind of guy to let you slide if you were short on an item. His kind eyes and patient demeanor had made him a favorite among the lumberyard crews, even if his accent sometimes drew suspicious looks from less tolerant customers. 3 lumberjacks stood in line for cigarettes, their conversation a mixture of work complaints and weekend plans. In the bread aisle, an elderly woman with silver hair and a floral dress carefully examined loaves, her weathered hands showing the care of someone who'd learned to make every dollar count. And near the back, by the motor oil and antifreeze, lurked a young man in a black hoodie. Something about him immediately put Al on edge, the way his eyes darted around the store, the way he kept glancing toward the old lady's purse as she fumbled for her wallet. Al nudged Falcon with his elbow. Check out the fashion statement by the Valvoline. Falcon followed his gaze and sighed. Maybe we should stay out of this one. We're supposed to keep our noses clean, remember? Hey, we're not the ones gawking at an old lady's purse like it's a Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, Al replied, grabbing a bag of chips from the nearest rack. At this point, it's more like conducting a public service. Falcon positioned himself casually near the door, understanding his brother's intentions without further discussion. They'd done this dance before in juvenile detention, on the streets, anywhere predators thought they could prey on the innocent without consequence. The guy looked rough around the edges, but no immediate threat. The Mitchell boys knew the type. Just some desperate kid looking to make a quick buck. Probably unemployed since the factory closures, maybe with a habit to feed or bills piling up at home. In other circumstances, Al might have felt sorry for him, but not when he was eyeing a grandmother's grocery money. The old lady moved to the counter, counting out exact change with the deliberate precision of someone living on a fixed income. The hooded figure tensed, muscles coiling like a spring under his dark clothing. Just as the brothers predicted, he made his move. The punk lunged forward, snatching the purse from the old lady's startled hands, and bolted toward the exit, but Falcon was ready. As the thief reached the door, Falcon casually extended his foot. The guy went down hard, hitting the concrete sidewalk face first and spilling the purse's contents across the pavement. He scrambled to his feet, glaring at Falcon with the wild-eyed fury of someone whose desperate plan had just crumbled. Blood trickled from a scraped nose, and his hands clenched into fists. Al stepped outside, his movements relaxed but purposeful. You're not alone out here, Cupcake. It's been a pretty lousy day all around town. Why don't you do yourself a favor and get out of here before you end up making ladies' underwear or pressing license plates? The vagrant threw a clumsy right-hand jab, telegraphing the punch like a Western Union operator. Al had seen it coming from the moment the guy's weight shifted. His father's training kicked in like muscle memory. Al pivoted smoothly to his left, caught the extended wrist, and twisted it behind the attacker's back in one fluid motion. Simultaneously, He swept his left leg around the man's ankles and pushed forward, sending him face first into the sidewalk again. "You want to reconsider this?" Al asked conversationally, maintaining the hold with just enough pressure to make his point without causing real damage. The elderly lady appeared in the doorway, clutching her recovered purse and staring at Al with obvious admiration. "That was some pretty clever movement right there, son." Al released his grip and stepped back, allowing the would-be thief to scramble away with what remained of his dignity. "Yeah, that's my favorite one. My father taught me that on furlough from Kalamazoo." The old woman's expression softened with understanding and respect. She knew what Kalamazoo meant. Young men leaving home to fight in a conflict that seemed to drag on forever. Families holding their breath until their sons returned. She gathered her scattered belongings from the sidewalk with Falcon's help, then pressed a crisp $50 bill into his palm. "You boys enjoy the rest of your evening." "Yes, ma'am," they replied in unison, their mother's lessons in respect as deeply ingrained as their father's combat training. They spent the remainder of their break hour by the loading docks, sharing an unexpected bounty of snacks. Potato chips, soda, Hostess cakes, and candy bars, far more than they'd planned to buy with their own money. It wasn't that they were desperate for cash. Their family owned Elixir Corp. Inc. after all. But there was something satisfying about someone else footing the bill, especially when it came as a reward for doing the right thing. "Think that old lady was somebody's grandmother?" Falcon asked, washing down a Twinkie with orange Faygo. "Everybody's somebody's grandmother," Al replied philosophically. "Besides, you saw how she counted that change, probably stretching those dollars like the Inquisition's interrogator." Doyle approached from across the yard, accompanied by a young man Al hadn't seen before. The newcomer looked to be in his early 20s, with the kind of lean build that suggested either hard labor or hard living. His clothes were clean but worn, and his eyes had a sharpness that seemed at odds with someone applying for entry-level lumber work. Doyle surveyed their spread of snacks and shook his head with mock disapproval. "I hope you boys brought enough for the rest of the class." Al scoffed. "What do we look like, the Salvation Army?" "This is Carson," Doyle continued, gesturing to the newcomer. "Today's his first day. I want you to show him around, teach him the ropes." He looked between the brothers and their new colleague. "Carson, meet regretting foreskin. I mean Al and Falcon." Al gave his boss a withering look. "You do realize, Doily, that we're barely a week into this job ourselves? We haven't even gotten our first paychecks yet, and you already got us training people." He gestured dramatically at the situation. "You know what you get when you put fresh fish with fresh fish? Sushi. It's gonna smell pretty fishy around here." Doyle just chuckled and walked away, leaving the three young men to sort themselves out. Carson extended a hand toward Al, his grip firm but not aggressive. "Thanks for showing me around. I really need this job." "Don't we all?" Al replied, studying the newcomer's face. There was something familiar about him, though he couldn't place it. "Where'd you work before this?" "Couple places up north," Carson said vaguely. "Factory work mostly, but things got slow after the war started pulling people away." Falcon nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, seems like everybody's got family in Kalamazoo these days." "Speaking of which," Carson continued with what seemed like casual interest, "you guys from around here? I'm still learning my way around Flint." "Born and raised," Al confirmed. "Family business is actually in town, but," he shrugged, "sometimes a man's got to make his own way, you know." "What kind of business?" Carson asked, and there was something in his tone a little too interested, a little too focused, that made Al's mental alarm start buzzing. "Boring stuff," Al deflected smoothly. "Chemical supply. You know, cleaning products for offices, that kind of thing." It wasn't entirely a lie. Elixir Corp. did manufacture cleaning products, among other things. But something about Carson's questions felt off, like a job interview conducted by someone who already knew the answers. "Well," Falcon interjected, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrent of tension, "if you're gonna learn the lumber business, might as well start with the basics." He stood and dusted off his jeans. "Rule number 1, always check the grade stamps." Rule number 2, if Doyle's yelling, you're probably doing something wrong. Rule 3, if Al's being sarcastic, you're definitely doing something wrong. Carson laughed a sound that seemed genuine enough. Got it. Anything else I should know? Al studied him for another moment, then decided to file his suspicions away for later consideration. Maybe the guy was just nervous about a new job. Maybe he was naturally curious. Or maybe Al was being paranoid after a week of honest work and recent freedom. Yeah, Al said finally, crushing his empty soda can. Don't let Doyle catch you sitting around too long. Break time's over. As they walked back toward the lumber stacks, Al couldn't shake the feeling that Carson was watching him a little too closely, asking a few too many questions, and showing a bit too much interest in things that shouldn't matter to someone just looking to haul boards around for minimum wage. But then again, after a short stint in juvenile detention, maybe everyone seemed suspicious. Still, Philip's voice echoed in his mind. Trust your instincts, son. They're usually right. And Al's instincts were telling him that Carson wasn't just another fresh fish looking for work. He was something else entirely. That evening, East 3rd Militia Headquarters, Hardy's Auto Repair. The radio crackled with static as Sergeant Norvell Stern adjusted the frequency, trying to cut through the interference that had been plaguing communications with the Kalamazoo front for weeks. Lester sat beside him in the basement command center, a folder of reconnaissance reports spread across the scarred wooden table. Thunder 6, this is Flint Base. Do you copy? Stern spoke into the handset, his voice carrying the practiced calm of a man who'd made countless radio calls under pressure. After a moment of white noise, a familiar voice emerged from the speaker. Flint Base, this is Thunder 6. General Drake Call here. Good to hear your voice, Norvell. How are things holding up back home? Stern and the general had served together in Inkster, two young sergeants who'd learned to trust each other when bullets were flying and orders were confused. Now Drake Call wore stars on his collar, while Stern commanded a militia from a garage basement, but the respect between them remained unchanged. That's what I'm calling about, sir, Stern replied, his tone growing serious. Lester here has some intelligence you need to hear. He handed the microphone to his reconnaissance specialist. Lester cleared his throat and began his report with military precision. General Call, sir. We've completed a 3-day observation mission in Beecher. The Clio Spire Guard has established a forward operating base with an estimated 8,000 to 10,000 personnel. They're running supply convoys, recruitment operations, and what appears to be military-grade equipment acquisition. The radio was quiet for several seconds before Call's voice returned, tinged with concern. 10,000? Lester, are you certain of those numbers? Conservative estimate, sir. Could be more. They've got armored vehicles, artillery pieces on flatbeds, and a command structure that suggests professional military leadership. This isn't gang activity anymore, it's a full-scale invasion force. Another pause. When General Call spoke again, his voice carried the weight of command decisions and impossible choices. Norvell, I wish I had better news for you. I'd love to come back home, or at least send some support your way, but Alphason views the Kalamazoo conflict as too important to the national interest. Too many elected officials have their political futures tied to this theater. Too many defense contractors have their profits riding on continued military engagement. Stern leaned closer to the radio. What's the economic situation down there, sir? Brutal, Call replied without hesitation. The unresolved conflict is already affecting supply chains across multiple states. If we pull out now, or even reduce our commitment, the economic impact could destabilize the entire nation. The politicians are terrified of being seen as weak, and Governor Cost's restrictive legislation here in Kalamazoo has made it too interesting for underworld entities for peace, bureaucracy, and bundles of cash. Unfortunately, the bottom line is the bottom line. Lester frowned, studying the intelligence reports. General, there's something else that doesn't add up. Intelligence suggests the 989th Northern Genesee should be operating closer to our region. That's their traditional area of responsibility. Instead, we seeing them engaged down in Kalamazoo fighting against your forces. You're absolutely right, and that concerns me too. Call confirmed. Normally, we'd be fighting against the 989th to maintain security in Genesee. Instead, I find myself facing off against elements of the 989th here in Kalamazoo. I've personally helped the 194th of Port-Doe Province Jaspers face off against the 437th of Washtenaw Azurites. That should give you a scope of how large-scale the war has become here. Stern exchanged a meaningful look with Lester. They'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed by a general made the situation feel even more dire. "What's our timeline, sir?" Stern asked. "Unfortunately, for now, the East 3rd Militia and other local factions will have to defend Genesee on their own. I'm pushing for permission to detach a battalion, but the political pressure from Alphason is enormous. Every time I bring up regional security, I get reminded about national priorities and strategic objectives." The frustration in Call's voice was evident even through the radio static. Here was a general who'd spent his career protecting Magni Maris 5 soil, being told that politics mattered more than the safety of Magni Maris 5 cities. "How long can you hold?" Call asked. Stern looked around the basement command center, donated radios, hand-drawn maps, folding chairs that had seen better days. Then he thought about the thousands of militia members scattered across Flint, most of them factory workers and shop owners who'd never expected to face a military invasion. "We'll hold as long as we can, sir. That's what we do." "I know you will, Norvell. And I want you to know when this political nonsense in the state of Kalamazoo finally resolves, the 31st MM5 will come home. We won't abandon Genesee." "Understood, sir. We'll keep the lights on. Thunder 6 out." The radio fell silent, leaving Stern and Lester alone with the weight of their situation. No cavalry was coming. No reinforcements were en route. The East 3rd Militia would face over 10,000 enemies with whatever they could scrape together from hardware stores and personal collections. Stern stood and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful evening streets of Flint. Partially irritated by this calm, few outside of this building were aware of the storm that was brewing on the horizon. "Alphason wants to play politics while our cities burn. Maybe it's time we reminded them what militias do when their militaries fail them." "What's that, Sarge?" "We take care of our own." Chapter 4. The Staging Post, Beecher. The abandoned warehouse in Beecher still reeked of motor oil and rust, its broken windows offering a clear view of the southern approach to Flint. Commander Vors Tellic stood before a tactical map spread across a makeshift table, his fingers tracing the arterial roads that fed into the city like veins. The red pins marking guard positions formed a tightening noose around their target. Captain Frank Fronton kicked at a piece of debris, sending it skittering across the concrete floor. "My beloved commander, with respect, we now have 3 full companies staged and ready. Efficient artillery support provided by vehicles we've commandeered from the abandoned 989th Northern Outpost. The collapse of Flint's defenses are imminent. Why do you overwhelm yourself with these scrolls about ancient riddles?" Tellic didn't look up from the map. His voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Because, Captain, brute force wins battles. But prophecy wins nations." "The echoes of the Anvil's axe," Fronton said, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. "My dear commander, half our men can barely read, let alone understand mystical poetry. They understand bullets and blades." "And that's precisely why they'll never rise above captain," Tellic replied, finally turning to face his subordinate. His eyes held the fervor of a true believer. "Listen to me, Frank. In the center of the hand of the Petoskey Stone, where the Wolverines feast and the industrious tinker, the axe shall awaken. Do you know what that means?" Fronton shrugged. "I'm not absolutely sure myself, but I'm positive that you will enlighten me." Tellic moved to the window, gazing south toward Flint's skyline. "The hand of the Petoskey Stone, Frank. Magni Maris 5 itself. The entire nation laid out like an open palm. And here, In the state of Genesee, in this industrial heart where the Wolverines feast, this is the center of that hand. The prophecy isn't just about some mystical weapon. It's about control of the entire region. Commander, in the absence of the 989th, we have made short work of the northern sectors. Is it truly necessary to put this much concern behind a simple axe? We've already got the firepower to... Because, Tellic interrupted, his voice dropping to an almost whisper, whoever wields the axe doesn't just hold a weapon. They hold the loyalty of every soul affected by the prophecy. Every soldier, every civilian who's heard the stories passed down through generations. Control the wielder, control the weapon, and you control the hearts and minds of an entire population. Fronten crossed his arms. And if there is no axe, if it's just fairy tales and superstition, a thin smile crossed Tellic's face. Then we lose nothing but time, and we still have enough numbed minds to finish what we started. But Frank, he turned back to the map, placing his finger on the state of Genesee. The time of the prophecy is at hand. I can feel it in the air itself. Something is stirring in this region, something the old text spoke of. The Anvil Stone altar beneath the shadowed spire. We'll find it, and when we do, we'll be ready. Fronten studied his commander's profile, noting the zealous gleam in his eyes. Commander, what if the wielder isn't someone we can control? What if they're already aligned against us? Tellic's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. Then we'll make sure they understand the consequences of opposing the Clio Spire Guard. The prophecy speaks of the first of many who will fall. It doesn't specify which side they'll fall on. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant rumble of guard vehicles moving through Beach's streets. Fronten looked out at the approaching dusk, then back at his commander. Orders, Commander? Double intelligence operations in the southern areas. I want every Kodastic temple, every altar examined. And Frank? Tellic rolled up the map with precise military efficiency. Start gathering intelligence on anyone in Flint with unusual capabilities. Old families, local legends, anyone the civilians might look to in times of crisis. Understood, Commander. Fronten headed toward the door, then paused. Commander, what if we're not the only ones who know about this prophecy? Tellic's expression hardened. Then we'd better find the axe before they do. The sacred grove, hidden sanctuary, Genesee. The ancient oak stood hollow at its center, its massive trunk worn smooth by countless generations of reverent hands. Within the natural cathedral of its heartwood, 7 figures sat in a circle, their voices barely above whispers in the pre-dawn darkness. Candles flickered against the living walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to breathe with the tree itself. Mira Thorne, eldest of the Genesee Kodastic observers, ran her weathered fingers along the smooth bark. At 273 Wyclin, she had felt Kodos' pulse longer than any of them. The dreams grow stronger each night, she began, her voice carrying the weight of visions. 3 times this week I've seen the spiral of bone and flame. The helix pattern burns itself into my sleep. Across from her, young Thomas Kales shifted uncomfortably. At barely 64 Eichlin, he was the newest observer, his sensitivity to Kodos still raw and overwhelming. I felt it yesterday at the river, he said quietly. The water. It wasn't just flowing. It was singing. Old songs, older than words. Elder Marcus Webb nodded knowingly. The land remembers what has been forgotten. Kodos stirs because the time approaches. He gestured to the circular space around them. For 60 generations, this grove has sheltered our vigil. Our forefathers spoke of signs, of a coming awakening. We are the ones chosen to witness it. Sister Catherine Morse, her eyes still closed in meditation, spoke without opening them. I've walked the industrial districts in my visions. The smoke and steel don't silence Kodos, they amplify it. The industrious tinker of the prophecy. It's not just about making things. It's about the rhythm, the heartbeat of creation itself. I can hear it in the factory hammers, feel it in the assembly lines. The Wolverines feast, murmured David Chen, the youngest observer at 46 Wyclin. I've seen them in my meditations, not the animal, but the spirit it represents. Fierce protection, territorial guardianship. The people of this land carry that spirit, even if they don't know it. Mira's eyes grew distant, and in the center of the hand, I felt the pull southward, toward the industrial heart. Something there calls to Kodos with increasing urgency. The prophecy speaks of awakening, but I sense it's more than that. It's recognition the moment when the chosen one realizes what they carry within them. Thomas leaned forward, his young face etched with concern. But Elder Mira, what if the prophecy is misunderstood? What if those who seek to control it, the Clio Spire Guard? Marcus interrupted grimly. Yes, we've all felt their presence like a shadow across the spiritual landscape. They seek to bind what should flow freely, to cage what must soar. Sister Catherine finally opened her eyes, and they held a haunting clarity. I've seen two paths in my visions. In one, the axe becomes what it was meant to be, a symbol of balance, a channel for Kodos's protective force. In the other, she shuddered. Corruption, the spiritual energy twisted into domination, the prophecy perverted into conquest. Which brings us to our sacred duty, Mira said, her voice growing stronger. We cannot interfere directly that would violate the natural flow of destiny. But we can observe, we can witness, and when the moment comes, we can ensure the true path is clear. David Chen spoke carefully. Elder Mira, in your visions of the center of the hand, have you seen the wielder? Do we know who carries the spiral of bone and flame? Mira was quiet for a long moment, her fingers still tracing the bark. I've seen hands, mature hands of magic and a reluctant military discipline. Hands that move with unconscious grace, that shape and build and protect. And I've sensed a bloodline old strength running through new veins. But Kodos guards its secrets carefully. The wielder must discover their nature through their own journey. The signs multiply daily, Sister Catherine added. The industrial rhythm grows stronger, the dreams more vivid, the pull toward the center more insistent. Even those without our training begin to sense something stirring. Thomas looked around the circle nervously. What of the Anvil Stone altar? The prophecy speaks of it beneath the shadowed spire. Do we know where? When the time comes, Marcus interrupted gently. Kodos will reveal what needs revealing. Our role is not to seek, but to watch. Not to guide, but to witness. The prophecy will unfold as it must, and we will be here to ensure its truth is preserved. Mira rose slowly, the movement causing the candlelight to shift and dance. Brothers and sisters, the wheel of the world prepares to turn. We've waited lifetimes for this moment. Our ancestors passed down the sacred words, and now we live to see their fulfillment. She looked at each observer in turn. Return to your watches. Be present in the world, but apart from its conflicts. Feel for the stirring of destiny. Listen for the song of awakening. And when the axe reveals itself in whatever form Kodos deems fit, we will be ready to bear witness to the first stroke of a new age. The circle began to disperse, each observer moving with quiet reverence toward the grove's hidden exits. As the last candle was extinguished, only the ancient oak remained, its hollow heart still resonating with whispered prophecies and the patient pulse of Kodos itself. In the growing dawn light, a single leaf fell from the oak's highest branch, spiraling downward in a perfect helix pattern before coming to rest exactly where Mira had been sitting. The tree remembered, and it waited. At the Mitchell family estate in the city of Flint, it was a particularly cloudy morning as Denise Mitchell prepared breakfast while thumbing through the cable television channels. Her oldest son, Dan, as usual, was the first to arise. He entered the kitchen with a newspaper and his empty Elixara Corp ink mug in hand. He gently kissed his mother on the cheek as he opened the refrigerator door to retrieve the cream for his morning coffee, still scanning the Kalamazoo news channels in search of our absentee CEO. Hey, Mom. You should be thankful that you weren't drafted into this god-awful conflict, Dan. I know he isn't here to run the company right now, and you doing the best you can, but still, every once in a while, I hope that I can see some footage of him on the television punching one of those Azurites in the nose. She gently chuckled as Al and Falcon filed into the kitchen. Al, wearing nothing but his tighty-whities, nonchalantly grabbed a box of Kellogg's Frosted Flakes off of the top of the refrigerator as his family looked on in embarrassment. Dan, I hope you picked up something besides that 2% milk you usually get at the Fresh for Less, Al said. Dan replied, I hope you have something else to put on besides your da-dunt-da-dunts. How can you come in the kitchen with morning wood? Philip's younger brother and uncle to the boys, Joseph Mitchell, walked in, took a look at Al, shaked his head, and snapped his fingers. Instantly, a pair of Al's gym shorts materialized on Al, covering the indecency. Falcon sunk his head in his hands at the table. I don't know what's worse, the fit or the smell. A news report caught Denise's attention as she hushed the rest of the family up. You're watching WKOZ. M. Keith Shanley. Today, the offices of Dr. Emerlin Cast, the once chair of Kalamazoo's State Indoctrination Board and now governor of Kalamazoo, were raided by national investigators. Sparked by not only the plea deal testimony of one of the individuals caught burglarizing the Magni Maris 541st Citrine House District office at the 40 Winks complex, but the recent surfacing of audio released to the Associated Press where an unknown figure alleges that the governor may be involved in shady union kickback deals. WKOZ's Ewell Macopson spoke with a legal expert about what this may mean for the governor and his administration. Ewell? The news camera pans left to Ewell in front of a separate screen in the studio. Ewell Macopson begins his report. Thank you, Keith. I spoke with former city attorney John Robinson for some legal perspective on this, and though today's raid on the governor's office raises concerns, he doesn't believe that the governor is in any immediate legal trouble. The screen switches to an image of attorney John Robinson. These accusations are mired in baseless, tasteless attempts to besmirch the good name of my good friend Dr. Cost, who has for years contributed to the well-being and the structural foundation of this state. If I were him, I would just have my lawyers talk for me and shut the hell up. The screen then cuts to clips from a news conference the governor held earlier that day. I say to everyone listening today, these facts. I have no knowledge about the 40 Winks break-in. I took no part in or knew about any of the subsequent cover-up details. I never authorized or encouraged subordinates to participate in any unauthorized surveillance tactics. I am not a crook. I would never use my powers, neither now as governor or then as chair of the State Indoctrination Board, for anything other than to secure the well-being of the people of Kalamazoo. The screen switches back to Macopson as he continues his report. I also hit the streets today to get the reaction from Kalamazoo residents to the news of the raids on the governor's office. On screen now, a middle-aged, balding man in a business suit and glasses. I think he's getting his just desserts. He's inexplicably tied up with the Raines brothers, who have no more social consciousness than a cat. The governor has never been a man of principle in my view. The screen then cuts to a man in front of a bus stop. Well, everybody's in trouble that voted for Cost now. I'll be honest and frank with you, and I hope the day comes they realize, and I'm sure that they do now, that I hope that they get somebody better in office to run this state. The camera then pans to an older lady in a blue shawl. Well, I'm sticking by Cost, and I think that he'll be proven innocent. I truly believe that. The camera pans back to Huell in the studio. As this 40 Winks scandal unravels, we at WKZO will give you up-to-the-minute details, however the story develops. Back to you, Keith. In other news, memorial arrangements for the recently slain Erica Burns are still in the process of... Al laughed as he poured more cereal into his bowl. 40 Winks, huh? Seems like there's scandal brewing all over the country. Didn't some of your employees, Margaret and Tommy, have their own little 40 Winks' incident in the supply closet on the third floor? Guess we could call it Elixara Winks. Joseph nodded, smiling at Denise as she set a plate in front of him. I've been having these strange dreams lately. Feels like the world's out of sync, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Al looked up from his cereal. Now that you mention it, I've been having some weird dreams too. Dan, munching on a piece of toast, mussed the hair of all three men as he headed for the door. Ah, dreams. The realm of the well-rested. You two keep chasing them. I'm off to actually run the company. Joseph glanced over at Falcon and Al as Dan walked out. He's a great businessman, but a lousy wizard. Doesn't have that codastic connection like the rest of us. What you're feeling is a shift in the rhythm. Something's coming. Be careful, boys. As the door clicked shut behind Dan, a palpable silence lingered in the room, a silence thick with the unspoken weight of Joseph's warning. The day was just beginning, but already it felt like the world was holding its breath. The 4 Mile Spruce Field. Clouds maintained their lingo over the morning at the Circle Drive lumber yards, adding a sense of gloom to a day that was already not going so well for Doyle. A nonprofit organization was renovating a couple of blocks off of East Van Wagoner Avenue. Circle Drive lumber yards had won the bid to provide the wood for framing. This particular job would require a lot of wood. So earlier that week, Doyle started sending cutting crews to the 4 Mile spruce fields to extract spruces to be shipped to Circle Drive for preparation. Around 8:15 that morning, an unsupervised driver on his learning permit ran into one of the crew vans on the way to the spruce field, putting the van and the crew out of commission. After having the van towed back to the yard and arranging for the crew to be transported to Hurley Medical Center for examination, Doyle would spend a good portion of the day filling out insurance claims and incident reports. His weathered face creased into a frown as he hung up the phone. The morning hours were already climbing higher than he'd like for starting a timber run, and now he was short a full crew. "Mitchell, boys," he called across the lumber yard. Al and Falcon looked up from the stack of 2x4s they'd been sorting. "Got a situation. Some kid decided to play bumper cars with a logging van near Dort Mall this morning. Need replacements for the 4 Mile spruce field." Al wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his work glove. "Come on, Doily. First we're loaders, then we're trainers, now we're cutters." "What are we playing whack-a-position here? Got a large order that needs fulfillment this week," Doyle replied. "I think you boys will do a pretty good job up there." Al smirked. "Every soul on this yard stacking pallets is here because they know in their heart of hearts they don't want to go home at the end of the day with the aching joints of those poor bastards up there swinging axes." Falcon chuckled. "We're not exactly 2 hours there, 2 hours back," Doyle interrupted, his bald head gleaming as he gestured northeast. "It's already past 9, so you'll miss the worst heat of the day. Plus, I'll throw in a $50 bonus for each of you." Falcon perked up at that. "Each?" "Big order coming in Friday, and I need those spruces down. You boys game?" Al exchanged a glance with his brother. The bonus was decent, even if they didn't exactly need it. "All right, but if we end up looking like we went 10 rounds with a wood chipper, you won't," Doyle assured them. "Van's loading up now. Grab your gear." As they walked toward the company van, Al spotted Carson climbing into the passenger side. His jaw tightened. "Great. Wonder Boy's coming along. Come on, Al," Falcon said, shouldering his work bag. "Carson's all right. You're being paranoid." "Am I?" Al muttered, but he climbed into the van without further comment. The ride northeast took them through rolling hills dotted with farmland and patches of dense forest. The 3 senior workers, Eddie, Martinez, and Big Jim, spent most of the trip discussing overtime rates and complaining about the weather. Carson sat quietly in the front seat, occasionally glancing back at the Mitchell brothers. $50 bonus, Eddie was saying. "Hell, for that kind of money, I might actually swing the axe instead of just leaning on it." Everyone laughed except Carson, who just stared out the window. Al noticed. "Hey, Carson," Falcon called out. Pretty sweet deal, right? Bonus pay for a half day's work. Carson shrugged. I guess. Al frowned. Most guys their age would be excited about bonus money. Hell, even with the family business, $50 was $50. But Carson seemed completely disinterested, like money meant nothing to him. That was odd. When they reached the 4 Mile spruce field, Doyle's contact handed out the Axe's heavy, well-maintained tools with razor-sharp edges. The spruces stood tall and straight, perfect for lumber, but they'd require steady, powerful swings to bring down. All right, boys, Big Jim announced, hefting his axe. Let's see what we're made of. The work began immediately. Eddie and Martinez took their positions at nearby trees, their axes biting into bark with solid, methodical strikes. Big Jim worked with the steady rhythm of decades of experience. Carson approached his tree cautiously, his swings tentative and awkward. Al gripped his axe handle, feeling the weight of it settle naturally in his hands. Something about the tool felt right, familiar, even though he'd never done serious timber work before. He lined up his first swing and brought the blade down with a clean, powerful stroke that sank deep into the wood. Damn, he muttered, surprised by how easily the axe had bitten through the bark. Beside him, Falcon was having a similar experience. His swings came naturally, each one finding the perfect angle to maximize the cut. Within minutes, both brothers had established a rhythm that was almost musical. The whistle of steel through air, the solid thunk of blade meeting wood, the shower of chips flying away from the cut. Holy shit, Eddie called over, pausing to wipe his brow. You boys sure you've never done this before? Al looked at his tree, already a third of the way through. Around him, the others were struggling with their cuts, but his axe seemed to move with a will of its own. Each swing was perfectly placed, perfectly timed. It was like the tool was guiding him instead of the other way around. Falcon was making even faster progress. His tree swayed slightly with each impact, and Al could see it would be ready to fall soon. The older workers had barely made a dent in theirs. Carson had stopped working entirely. He stood leaning on his axe handle, watching the Mitchell brothers with unconcealed fascination. His eyes tracked every swing, every movement, like he was studying them. Hey, Falcon, Al said during a brief break, lowering his voice. Have you noticed your buddy Carson over there giving us the eyeball business? If he put the same amount of energy in his biceps as he's putting in his extraocular muscles, he might actually chop down a fucking tree. Falcon glanced toward Carson, who quickly looked away and resumed his ineffective chopping. Maybe he like you. You mean like light? Falcon laughed. I can see the headlines now. The 4 Mile bathhouse incident. Al chuckled. Circle winks. But seriously, he's been watching us like we're some kind of exhibition. And did you hear him when you mentioned the bonus? Guy acts like $50 is pocket change. Maybe his family's got money, Falcon suggested, then delivered another perfect swing that sent his spruce creaking ominously. Maybe. Al lined up his next cut. Or maybe there's something else going on. Like what? Al paused, the axe heavy in his hands. He couldn't shake the feeling that Carson wasn't who he claimed to be. I don't know. Maybe I didn't put enough Frosted Flakes in my bowl this morning, and I just don't have the proper fiber in my diet today. Falcon snorted with laughter. You're ridiculous. But as they returned to work, Al couldn't ignore the way Carson continued to observe them. Every few minutes, the young man would stop his own half-hearted efforts to watch how easily the Mitchell brothers brought their axes around, how naturally the movements came to them. By the time they loaded the van for the return trip, Al and Falcon had felled twice as many trees as the rest of the crew combined. The senior workers were exhausted, slumped against the van's windows as Martinez drove them back toward Flint. But the Mitchell brothers felt energized, almost invigorated by the work. Al noticed Carson watching them again, taking note of how alert they remained while everyone else fought off fatigue. There's something about that guy, Al said to himself, staring out at the passing landscape. Carson sat 3 seats ahead, but Al could see him in the reflection of the windshield, still occasionally glancing back. Whatever Carson's real story was, Al was certain they hadn't heard it yet. When they arrived back at the Circle Drive lumber yard, Doyle had an impressive display of cookies, donuts, coffee, juices, and potato chips laid out in the break room like a truck stop buffet. The crew dug in like long-haul truckers, gorging themselves without a second thought. Eddie and Martinez were at the other side of the room, talking with Doyle. Mid-conversation, Al noticed that Doyle glanced over at the Mitchell brothers with a satisfied grin, the kind that made Al feel more at ease than the one coming from the other side of the table. His eyes flicked to Carson, sitting quietly, eating an oatmeal cookie. The moment their eyes met, Carson quickly turned away, dropping his gaze like a guilty dog. Doyle walked over, clapped both Mitchell brothers on the shoulder. "I heard you boys did a fantastic job out there. When am I going to regret hiring you, Al?" Al, mouth full of donut, chuckled. "You know me, Doily. I'm a lackluster. Just give me some time." Doyle addressed the whole room, his voice booming like a command. "Your teammates were sent home from Hurley Medical, non-life-threatening injuries, but I'm not sending them back to the spruce fields just yet. That means I'll need a replacement crew of cutters to finish until the end of the week. Any volunteers?" Without thinking, Al and Falcon raised their hands. They hadn't expected it, but something about the rhythm of the axe had struck a chord. They were enjoying it more than they'd expected. But then, much to Al's surprise, Carson raised his hand too. The hell was with this guy? He hadn't seemed interested in the bonus, hadn't done a good job cutting trees, and now he was volunteering to go back out there? Al couldn't shake the thought. There was something about Carson that didn't add up. Chapter 6. The Staging Post, Beecher. The abandoned warehouse that served as the Clio Spire Guard's forward command buzzed with activity as Captain Frank Frunton made his way through the maze of equipment and personnel. Guard members cleaned weapons, sorted ammunition, and reviewed tactical maps spread across makeshift tables. The scent of gun oil and diesel fuel hung heavy in the air. Frunton found Commander Vors Tellic exactly where he expected, hunched over an ancient scroll, his weathered fingers tracing the faded ink of the prophecy. The commander's obsession with the echoes of the Anvil's axe had only intensified since their arrival in Beecher. "My beloved commander," Frunton began, his voice carrying that familiar undertone of calculated deference, "I trust you're finding the ancient texts illuminating as always?" Tellic didn't look up immediately. "What is it, Frank?" "Oh, please, don't burden yourself with my trivial concerns," Frunton replied, though his tone suggested anything but triviality. "I've just received some rather interesting intelligence from our dear friends Howard, Nick, and Carson. Nothing that should distract you from your important research, naturally." This caught Tellic's attention. He finally raised his eyes from the scroll. "Go on." Frunton clasped his hands behind his back, beginning his report with theatrical precision. "Well, my dear Commander, it seems our boys have been quite industrious in their reconnaissance. Howard has provided us with a comprehensive tactical assessment of Flint's terrain flat, rolling lands that would welcome our mechanized units with open arms. The city offers precious few choke points for defensive positions, and the Flint River remains beautifully undefended. Expected as much." Tellic grunted. "What about military presence?" That's where Nick's report becomes delightfully encouraging." Frunton's smile was thin and predatory. "No heavily fortified installations to speak of. Their militia, this East Third, force numbers only in the low thousands. Hardly worth the ammunition we'd expend dealing with them." Tellic nodded but seemed unimpressed. "Standard intelligence, Frank. You said something was interesting?" Frunton's eyes gleamed. "Indeed, my beloved commander. It's Carson's report that truly elevates our situation." He paused for dramatic effect, savoring the moment. "It seems there are two brothers in Flint. Mitchell is the family name who work at something called the Circle Drive Lumberyard. And they're rather gifted with axes, my dear. Exceptionally so, according to Carson. So much so that they'll be working at the Formar Spruce Field this very week." The change in Tellic's demeanor was immediate and unmistakable. His entire body tensed, and his eyes snapped to full attention. The scroll in his hands crinkled as his grip tightened. Axes. Tellic repeated slowly. Oh, yes, Fronton continued, barely containing his satisfaction. 2 brothers, skilled with axes, working in the very region where your precious prophecy speaks of the weapon's awakening? Surely just a coincidence, wouldn't you agree, Commander? Tellic stood abruptly, sending his chair scraping across the concrete floor. He moved to the tactical map of Genesee, his finger finding the location of Flint with practiced precision. The Mitchell brothers, he muttered. In Flint, working with axes. His voice grew stronger, more certain. Frank, this is no coincidence. The prophecy speaks of the Axe Awakening, where the Wolverines feast and the industrious tinker. Industrial Flint, in the heart of Genesee, the center of the Petoskey Stone's palm. Fronton watched his commander's growing excitement with measured interest. My dear Commander, while I certainly appreciate your enthusiasm for these ancient texts, might I suggest we not allow mysticism to cloud our tactical judgment? They're lumberjacks after all. Of course they'd be skilled with axes. But Tellic wasn't listening. He was already moving toward the communications equipment. I want full surveillance on these Mitchell brothers immediately. I want to know everything, where they live, who they associate with, their daily routines, and I want eyes on this 4-mar spruce field. Commander, Fronton said carefully, with respect, we have 3 companies ready to move on Flint. Wouldn't our resources be better spent on... The prophecy is unfolding, Frank. Tellic's voice carried an edge of barely controlled fervor. Don't you see? 2 brothers, skilled with axes, in the exact location the ancient texts describe. This isn't random chance, this is destiny manifesting itself. Fronton studied his commander's profile, noting the zealous gleam that had become increasingly familiar. And if these Mitchell brothers proved to be nothing more than simple laborers? If your prophecy leads us down a path that delays our primary objective? Tellic turned back to face his captain, and for a moment his expression was completely cold. Then we eliminate them and continue with the original plan. But Frank. He moved closer, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper Fronton had learned to recognize. If these brothers are connected to the prophecy, if one of them is destined to wield the Axe of Genesee, then controlling them gives us something far more valuable than a simple military victory, which would be the hearts and minds of every person who believes in the old stories, every soul who's heard their grandmother whisper about the ancient protectors of Genesee. Control the axe, control the wielder, and you control a legend. Tellic's smile was sharp as a blade. Legends, Captain, have a way of inspiring absolute loyalty, or absolute terror. Fronton nodded slowly. Very well, my beloved Commander. I'll have our people maintain close observation of these Mitchell brothers. Should I recall Howard, Nick, and Carson for reassignment? No, Tellic said firmly. Keep Carson in place at the lumberyard. I want him as close to these brothers as possible. Howard and Nick can continue their current assignments, but I want daily reports on any unusual activity. And our timeline for the main assault? Tellic returned to the map, his finger tracing the route from Beecher to Flint. We proceed as planned, but with modifications. The moment we have confirmation about these brothers one way or another, we move. If they're truly connected to the prophecy, I want them secured before they fully understand their potential. Fronton allowed himself a small smile. Of course, Commander. I'll see to the arrangements immediately. Though I do hope, for all our sakes, that your ancient texts prove as reliable as your tactical instincts. They will, Frank. I can feel it. Tellic looked out the window toward the southern horizon where Flint lay waiting. The echoes of the Anvil's axe aren't just prophecy anymore. They're becoming reality. As Fronton left to relay the new orders, Tellic remained at the window, his mind racing with possibilities. 2 brothers, skilled with axes, working in the very heart of the prophesied land. The pieces were falling into place exactly as the ancient scroll had foretold. Soon, very soon, the Axe of Genesee would awaken, and when it did, Commander Vors Tellic intended to be ready. Chapter 7: The Return of Philip Mitchell. Watching a train pull into a Magni Maris 5 Interrail tram station is something that everyone ought to see. Most people do. It is a boon to the legacy of the Murphy administration. Throughout the 1940s, the nation's sovereign Frank Murphy laid the foundation to what would be an infrastructural masterpiece, engineering and technology at its finest. Trains the width of an urban city block, able to transport thousands of people as well as vehicles, cargo, materials, whatever needed to be transported throughout the nation. Before the commissioning of the IRT, it would have took Philip Mitchell 43 hours to make it from Kalamazoo to Flint by a motor car, 6 hours by aircraft. But on this train, he made it home in 1 hour and 57 minutes. A great service to the billions of Magni Maris 5 citizens who either couldn't afford airfare or needed to get from one part of the nation to the next quickly. Philip Mitchell stepped off onto the bustling platform of the IRT station at Saginaw and 8th, one of thousands of draftees happy to be home, double D forms in pocket, and the joy of relief in their eyes. Philip stopped at one of the dozens of newsstand station markets and got himself a pack of Lucky Stripes. He then walked to the nearest payphone and called his brother Joseph. "Joey boy, guess who?" "Phil, is that you?" "I'm home." "That's great. Hold on for a second. I'll get Denise." "Wait," Philip replied. "Don't tell anyone I'm home yet. Call a family meeting at Elixir Corp. Inc. I want to surprise everybody. You got it. You need me to come pick you up?" "No, I'll take a cab. I might even stroll for a while. Me and these city blocks have got a bit of catching up to do." Joseph smiled. "Good hearing from you, Phil. Look forward to seeing you at Elixir Corp." Philip enjoyed a brief stroll throughout the streets of Flint, until eventually he took a taxi to Batiste's Temple Dining Room, a place he often stopped at during furloughs. They had great fish baskets and homemade pies. After a good meal, he caught a cab to Elixir Corp and snuck in through the back. He had access. He was the CEO. Several employees recognized him. He just placed his finger over his lips and told them to carry on. He went to the meeting room and peered inside, unnoticed. Everyone was there except for Dan, and Philip knew exactly where to find him. He went up to Dan's office. Patricia was outside of Dan's door. Before she could say anything, he hushed her as he casually strolled into Dan's office. "Pull my finger." Dan looked up from his reports. "Well, goodness gracious, the Grand Wizard has arrived." "Grand Wizard," Philip replied. "That doesn't sound very PC." They hugged. "I'm guessing from the recent news that the war is over." "Indeed, son. But I might go back to Kalamazoo for the victory parade. You can come along if you like, but let's go down and say hi to the family." Dan brought Phil up to date on everything. The unease in the city, Al and Falcon's new job, situations going on with the corporation. By the time they got to the meeting room, Dan walked in first. Everyone looked up. "So what's this all about?" Al said with his arms folded. Philip busted into the room. Denise jumped up so fast her chair hit the ground to hug her husband. Falcon sat there unsure if the ghost he was looking at was real. Even Al was happy, though his pride wouldn't let him show it. "Look at my young lumberjacks. Al, you look older," Al replied. "And you look slimmer." "Yeah, war does that to a man. Don't worry, son. I'll pick those pounds right back up." They all laughed. They spent the next 30 minutes familiarizing each other with one another's situations. Phil talked about the surrender of General Crockett at West Leroy. Al talked about the new job at the Circle Drive Lumberyard. Philip told them about the upcoming victory parade on Main Street in downtown Kalamazoo and how he intended to attend. Falcon and Al didn't seem too thrilled. They told Philip about the big deal that Doyle had and how he needed them to complete the job. Philip called Patricia into the room. 30 minutes later, Al was on the phone with Doyle. "Hey, Doily, Al Mitchell here." Doyle sighed. "Looks like you boys missed a van ride this morning." "I'm hip," Al replied, "and I'm sorry about that." I really am. But my father just returned home from Kalamazoo. Yeah, I noticed a bunch of draftees coming in today. Saw it on the news this morning. I got a couple of cousins on the way home now. My father wants us to come with him to the victory parade in Kalamazoo, Al said. Doyle wasn't too thrilled about the news. You know I've got a lot of lumber that needs to be chopped here. About that, Al replied, there ought to be a young lady with glasses outside of your office door right about now, just as he said that knock, knock, knock at Doyle's door. Right on time, Doyle got up with the phone in his hand. Patricia handed him an envelope. He opened the content. Al wasn't there to see Doyle's facial expression, but Patricia was, and she smiled when his jaw dropped. That ought to cover anything you missed during our absence. I promise we'll be back to work after the parade. Doyle was surprised. Elixir Corp. Inc.? Why are they paying for your leave? My father owns the company, Al replied. How did I miss that? Doyle said. You're making it very difficult to regret hiring you, son. Al chuckled. I'm still working on that. See you in about a week. Have fun, boys. Doyle replied as he hung up, amazed from the number of zeros on the check he just received from Elixir Corp. Inc. The atmosphere in downtown Kalamazoo was festive. It must have been millions of people throughout the downtown area, mostly gathered on Main Street. Many concerts, juggling acts, food stands everywhere. A stark contrast to the downtown Kalamazoo atmosphere 1 month prior. Seated at a table on a recently set up outside patio of the Chinese steakhouse on Drake Road, just north of Main Street, Joseph, Philip, Denise, Dan, Al, and several other Mitchell family members enjoyed a dinner with a couple of members of the 31st MM5 Genesee Central Division. Philip was one of a handful of the squad members not in dress uniform. He didn't care to participate in the parade. He just wanted to enjoy the atmosphere, which he knew would be festive. Ralph Wagner, a young and overly ambitious lab tech with the 31st, was sharing war stories with the Mitchell family. Philip wasn't too pleased when Ralph started talking about some of the more discreet aspects of their operations in Kalamazoo. Casually nipping on a piece of asparagus, Ralph turned to Denise and asked, Did your husband tell you about the time that he was imprisoned at Vandercook Lake? Philip squinted his eyes at the young lab tech. No, Denise replied. He never mentioned that. Ralph continued. Old Philly boy here wasn't always a lab rat. He started off in infantry. Eventually, some syndicate out of Conant Jardin started distributing a new kind of narcotic throughout the region. Philip became a great asset due to his knowledge in kodo stick potions, which it turns out the narcotic was laced with. Ralph, that's classified, Philip said. Not anymore, Ralph replied. The war is over, remember? Ralph continued on with his conversation. Philip placed his hands underneath the table and began rotating his finger in a circular pattern. After about 12 rotations, he snapped his finger and Ralph was instantly silenced. Oblivious to the current situation, Al turned to his family and said, You would disregard everything that this man just said. This is classified stuff. We're not supposed to talk about it. Ralph appeared to be in a hypnotic state. After a while, he shook his head. What was I talking about? Everybody laughed. At the end of the dinner, Philip paid the check for the whole party. Most of the family went to check out some of the local bands at one of the many stages set up throughout the downtown area. Philip, Al, and Denise decided to walk down Main Street and observe the rest of the parade. They leisurely strolled down Main Street for a few blocks when Philip noticed a familiar face in the crowd, a veteran of the Kalamazoo conflict from the 217th Doyon Rand. Doyon smiled. Hey, Phil, what are you doing here? Why aren't you in the parade? I was a draftee, Phil answered. After Lockett surrendered, all draftees from Genesee were given their double D forms. I'm glad to say I'm a civilian again. Doyon noticed Denise and Al standing next to him. Lieutenant, I'd like for you to meet my wife Denise and my second oldest son, Alfred. Doyon nodded. Why aren't you in the parade, Lieutenant? And where's your uniform? Long story, Doyon replied. Anyway, enjoy civilian life. It's good seeing you, Phil. I'm going to get something to drink." As they continued their stroll down Main Street, Philip turned to Denise and said, "That business that Ralph was jabbering on about at Vandercook Lake, that guy there is the reason I'm here to tell you about it. Even though I'm not supposed to, I ended up doing some classified work involving his sister. We did some classified research at the 31st staging area that helped her develop an antibody for the drug the syndicate began to spread throughout the region." Denise somewhat smiled. "Thank God that horrible narcotic didn't affect Flint as much as it did the rest of the region." They continued their stroll. After some time, they caught back up with the rest of the family. Falcon handed his mother a large teddy bear he won at a ball toss, when all of a sudden, boom, a large explosion. Chaos erupted. Military instincts instantly kicked in. As Philip surveyed the area, the war was supposed to be over. What the hell was going on? He called out to the family, "Mitchells, it's time to go." Back at the 4 Mile Spruce Field, Carson was not too pleased with the day's events. He volunteered for harder work, for nothing. Where were the Mitchell brothers? Did they quit? What had happened? Why were they not there, swinging axes with him so that he could take note? As he picked up an axe and headed for another spruce, he was about to swing when he heard a voice from above. "Leave this one be." It was Gethin Mine, perched in blue camouflage on one of the branches. Carson stood at attention, then looked around to see if anyone had noticed him. "The commander sent me here to observe these mysterious axe wielders that you told Fronten about. All I see are a bunch of tired old lumberjacks. Where are they?" "I don't know," Carson replied. "They were supposed to be here. I'm not sure what's going on. If you're giving us false information—" "No," Carson replied. "I swear it to be true. On the honor of the guard, I will find them. I will bring them to you." Gethin Mine tilted his head as if coming to a decision. "I'll take your word for now, boy, but you better not fail us." "You ought to have a basic understanding of what that will mean for you." "Yes, sir," Carson replied immediately, then headed over to start chopping another spruce. Part 9, Chapter 8, The Genesee Cadastic Observers. On the shores of the Flint River, beneath the 5th Street Bridge at the shore of the Flint River, Elder Marcus Webb stood in meditation, filling the industrial hum of the city night. This was his observation post. For years, he would stand there and have conversations with the river. The river would ask him, "What do you stand for?" He would ask the river, "What do you run from?" Its gnarled roots drinking deep from waters that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Tonight, 6 other observers would join him in sacred circle, the dying embers of their ceremonial fire casting dancing shadows across weathered faces marked by years of spiritual contemplation. Elder Marcus Webb opened his eyes as the others approached, catching the moonlight filtering through the canopy. They broke the meditative silence that had settled over his contemplation. His voice carried the weight of his numerous years as an observer, each word measured and deliberate. "The pulse came 3 days ago," he said, his eyes reflecting the river's gentle current. Brief but unmistakable. Kodo stirred as the draftees began their return from Kalamazoo. Mirathorn shifted slightly, her weathered hands folded in her lap. As the group's most gifted seer, her visions had guided them through countless spiritual crossroads. "I felt it too, Marcus." A momentary murmur in the pulse as the draftees began to return, but it vanished quickly, as if the pulse itself left, but like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples are still spreading. Thomas Cale nodded slowly, his keen eyes studying the patterns the dying fire cast upon the ground. The rhythm of the world is changing. Even the trees feel it. Their leaves whisper of transformation. Sister Catherine Morse, her hooded cloak rustling softly in the evening breeze, leaned forward with an urgency that commanded attention. "I must share what came to me in the deep hours before dawn. A dream, but clearer than waking sight." The circle grew still, knowing that Catherine's dreams rarely came without purpose. "I saw hands," as she glanced at Mirathorn, she continued, her voice taking on the distant quality of one recounting sacred visions. The hands of an alchemist, scarred, strong, stained with the essence of countless brews. When I looked upon the palms, the lines spoke to me as clearly as ancient script. She paused, her fingers tracing patterns in the air, as if following the memory of those prophetic lines. Unresolved conflict marked the left-hand battles won, but wars left unfinished. The right spoke of return, of homecoming shadowed by greater trials yet to come. The lifeline. She hesitated, her brow furrowing. The lifeline was broken, then reforged stronger than before. David Chen, at 46 Wycliffe, the youngest among them, stirred restlessly. "There was an explosion," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the night air like a blade, "at the Victory Parade in downtown Kalamazoo. The news outlets are calling it an isolated incident, but," he shook his head, "the timing cannot be coincidence." Elder Webb's eyes sharpened. "What manner of explosion? They're reporting numerous fatalities, but witnesses speak of figures fleeing the scene. Some say they saw members of the Raines brothers. Others claim it was retaliation." David's hands clenched unconsciously. The official story keeps changing, which means the truth is something they don't yet know. Thomas Kell leaned back against the massive oak behind him, his scholar's mind working through the implications. The Victory Parade, a celebration of Kalamazoo's conclusion, yet tainted by violence. It fits the pattern we've observed. "The pattern of what?" asked David. Mira Thorne's voice carried the weight of ancient knowledge. "The pattern of the prophecy, the echoes of the anvil's axe. Each echo grows stronger. Each ripple brings us closer to the moment of awakening." Sister Catherine nodded slowly. "The alchemist's hands in my vision, they were returning from great labor, from the forge of conflict. If the explosion marks the true end of Kalamazoo's troubles, then the next phase begins now." Elder Webb stood, his aged frame still commanding despite the years. He walked to the river's edge, where moonlight turned the flowing water into liquid silver. When he spoke, his words carried the authority of one who had spent decades interpreting the will of Kodesh. "Brothers and sisters, I believe we stand at the threshold of what our predecessors have long awaited. The time of the prophecy is not merely near, it has begun." He turned back to face the circle, his expression grave but resolute. "From this night forward, we must speak of these events not as separate incidents, but as chapters in a greater story. The return of the draftees, the pulsing Kodos, the explosion that mars victory. These are the opening movements of what I propose we call." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "The Axe of Genesee." The phrase hung in the air like an incantation, and each observer felt its truth resonate in their bones. Thomas Kell was the first to respond. "The Axe of Genesee," he repeated, tasting the words. "Yes, a chronicle not just of events, but of transformation." David Chen leaned forward, his analytical mind already working. Before coal was discovered at the southern tip of the North Genesee Basin, Mount Morris served as a subterranean shrine of the Kusangi no Tsurugi, the local remnants of an ancient cult from Ashari. They worship weapons, and it's possible that they may have had an anvil to forge swords with in their shrine at Mount Morris. If this is the beginning, then we need to understand what we're looking for. The prophecy speaks of the belly of the hallowed earth, where the Anvil Stone's altar lies beneath the shadowed spire. It also mentions a blade forged of olden fire, but we know this isn't literal. Sister Catherine's eyes brightened with sudden understanding. The architectural helix, the pattern mentioned in the ancient verse, it's not speaking of steel and iron. "No," agreed Mira Thorne, her seer's intuition crystallizing into certainty. "The axe is bloodline, legacy, the genetic spiral that carries the essence of Kodos through mortal flesh." Elder Webb returned to the circle, settling onto his worn cushion with a satisfaction that spoke of pieces falling into place. "Precisely. We seek not a weapon of war, but a wielder of destiny. Someone whose very being resonates with the ancient forces." The alchemist from my vision, Catherine said suddenly. The hands bore scars that spoke of more than ordinary craft. Battle scars, yes, but also the deeper marks of one who has touched the fundamental forces of creation. Thomas Kell stroked his beard thoughtfully. An alchemist returned from war, carrying unresolved conflict yet destined for greater purpose. The parameters narrow. David Chin pulled a small notebook from his robes, his practical nature asserting itself. I can cross-reference the returning draftees with known alchemical practitioners in Genesee. If we're looking for someone with both military service and mastery of the brewing arts, do so, Elder Webb instructed. But remember, we observe. We do not interfere. The prophecy will unfold as Kodos wills, with or without our guidance. Mirathorn gazed into the dying embers, where she often glimpsed fragments of possible futures. The wielder draws near. I can feel it in the very air we breathe. Soon the center of the hand will reveal its chosen guardian. Sister Catherine crossed herself, a gesture that blended her Kodastic faith with the deeper spiritual currents they all served. May we prove worthy witnesses to what unfolds. The legend of the Axe of Genesee begins, Elder Webb declared, his voice carrying across the water where it seemed to echo from the ancient stones themselves. Let us watch, let us record, and let us remember that we are but servants to forces far greater than ourselves. The fire died to glowing coals as the 7 observers settled into silent contemplation, each lost in thoughts of prophecy and destiny. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and the Flint River continued its march singing its eternal cadence, a song that now carried whispers of the extraordinary events soon to unfold in the heart of Genesee. In the distance, barely audible over the water's murmur, came the sound of a train whistle, another draftee returning home, perhaps the very one whose hands would soon grasp the legacy that awaited in the shadow of Mount Morris. Emergency meeting MM58, Jasper House District. The familiar hum of Elixara Corp. Inc.'s industrial machinery provided a steady backdrop as Philip Mitchell settled behind his desk, still processing the chaos he'd witnessed at the Kalamazoo Victory Parade. The explosion replayed in his mind the sudden flash, the screams, the instinctive military response that had kicked in despite his civilian clothes. That explosion wasn't random, Philip said, loosening his tie as his brother Joseph spread financial documents across the conference table. Too precise, too well-timed. Joseph nodded grimly, his weathered hands sorting through quarterly projections that suddenly seemed trivial. Somebody wanted to send a message. Question is, to who? Before Philip could respond, a sharp knock interrupted their speculation. Patricia Reynolds, Dan's administrative assistant, entered with the crisp efficiency that had made her indispensable to the company's operations. Mr. Mitchell, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have an emergency call from Representative Hector Hayes of the 8th Jasper House District. He says it's urgent regarding recent intelligence from the East 3rd Militia. Philip's expression hardened. Emergency calls from district representatives rarely brought good news, especially when they involved military intelligence. Put him through. Patricia nodded and retreated as Philip lifted the receiver. Hayes' voice crackled through the line, tense with barely controlled urgency. Philip, thank God I reached you. We need you and Dan at the district office immediately. We've got a situation developing that affects every business leader in Flint, and I mean everyone. Can you be here in 20 minutes? What kind of situation? The kind that requires closed doors and trusted faces. I'll brief you when you arrive, but Philip, bring your warhead, not your business head. The line went dead, leaving Philip staring at the receiver. Joseph raised an eyebrow. Trouble? Philip stood, already reaching for his jacket. Get Dan. We're about to find out. The briefing. The MM58th Jasper House District office felt smaller than usual, with so many bodies crammed into its modest conference room. Philip and Dan arrived to find Representative Hector Hayes orchestrating what appeared to be a war council disguised as a civic meeting. Philip and Dan Mitchell, Hayes announced as they entered. Thank you for coming on such short notice. We're on a conference call right now with General Drake Call of the 31st MM5 Genesee Central Division. Philip sort of scowled at the mention of the name. General Call, the man who drafted him into the Kalamazoo hell, who'd sent him to places that still haunted his dreams. Dan noticed his father's reaction and placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. The speakerphone crackled with the general's familiar voice, edged with frustration. I'm sitting here looking at my packed bags right now. I sent the majority of my draftees home, and this shit literally blows up in my face. At that point, Philip Mitchell rolled his eyes, unable to suppress the gesture. The general's problems were of his own making. Sergeant Norvell Stern stepped forward. Looks like you're in it for the extended stay, General. Unfortunately, I am, Sergeant, General Call replied. Sergeant, bring everyone in the room up to date on the current situation. Sergeant Norvell stood up with the bearing of a man who'd seen too much action for his age. His eyes swept the room, taking in the Mitchells, Robert Thompson from Drilling Flint Consortium, and the other industrial leaders Hayes had assembled. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sergeant Norvell Stern of the East 3rd Militia. I've been running intelligence operations from here to the city of Beecher, and I have knowledge of a pending invasion of the city of Flint by a group that calls themselves the Clio Spire Guard. Philip felt the temperature in the room drop. An invasion. The war was following him home. Stern continued, his voice carrying the weight of bad news. They function like locusts and operate through brute force. My intelligence indicated that they were supposed to have launched this invasion a week ago. However, they have remained in Beecher to recruit more to their forces. They now number in dozens of thousands. Robert Thompson whistled low. Dozens of thousands? No future in that. The city of Flint has no nearby military stronghold, nor do we have choke points where we can create kill boxes to deter the coming enemy threat, Stern pressed on. We're sitting ducks. General Drake Call interrupted from over the phone with bitter frustration. I've tried to lobby Alphason for quite some time to allow me to send several battalions home to defend the city. In their infinite wisdom, they have come to the conclusion that local police forces, along with the East 3rd Militia, can handle the threat. Philip muttered under his breath, idiots. Stabilization here in the Kalamazoo region cannot be guaranteed without the capture or kill of Laren Rains, Call continued. According to Alphason, they believe that the Rains brothers are behind the explosion at the Kalamazoo Victory Parade. However, I have intel that leads me to believe the Silver Domes of Yaktown perpetrated the explosion in a Black Ops operation in order to frame the Rains brothers in retaliation for the murder of one of their own, Frederick Dixon. The pieces clicked together in Philip's mind. The explosion he'd witnessed, the fleeing figures, it had been a setup from the beginning. With the recent passing of the Security Stabilization Act, the Erica Burns Memorial Bill, there's too much at stake politically to leave this debacle unresolved. Call concluded. Hector Hayes interrupted. In conclusion, that's where you come in, gentlemen. He looked towards the industrial leaders he'd invited to this emergency meeting as David Breed from the East 3rd Militia handed each of them a pamphlet. The East 3rd Militia is severely underfunded. With your help, gentlemen, we can help them in their recruitment drive, as well as securing armaments from General Dynamic Land Systems and communications updates from Rand Electronics. Philip Mitchell glanced up at the mention of Rand Electronics. His attention was further gained. He thought to himself, that couldn't be. Glancing over the pamphlet, Robert Thompson of Drilling Flint Consortium said, it seems things in the hood don't change. The more that goes on around the region, the more things stay the same. Another Flint area industrial oligarch replied, I'm sure that we can help the East 3rd Militia procure whatever they need in defense of our fair city. Hector Hayes continued, I've invited you all here because you've been great contributors to my past campaigns, and I know you care about the fate of the city just as deeply as I do. I have secured several grants in order to establish a defense fund in the absence of the 31st until such time they can return home. David Breed replied, It will be a burden asking so many who were drafted into the Kalamazoo conflict to now take up arms to defend their home, but it's a necessary evil compared to the evil that we now face. Philip Mitchell didn't want to speak in the presence of General Call out of fear of disrespecting the man. He despised him for drafting him into the Kalamazoo conflict, but he had already determined in his mind that Elixir Corp. Inc. would set aside funds to invest in the protection of Flint. Well, it makes no sense for us to sit around twiddling our thumbs, just kicking it. Let's get some funds flowing through the coffers of the East 3rd Militia. And you boys see to it that some caps get peeled, replied Robert Thompson of the Drilling Flint Consortium. Philip Mitchell's heart was left heavy by the end of the meeting. All that he had gone through during the Kalamazoo conflict just to come home to another war. But the meeting concluded with the East 3rd Militia on the rise, stronger than ever. The ride back to Elixir Corp. Inc. As Dan Mitchell drove, Philip sat in the passenger seat, gazing at the pamphlet he received at the meeting. Rand Electronics, he said out loud. What's that? Dan replied. Just thinking, son. Rand Electronics. Philip paused, memories surfacing like ghosts from the depths of classified operations. Near the middle of the war, I started working with a doctor by the name of Rand, who coincidentally I was introduced to by her brother, also named Rand. He saved me from a pending execution in Vandercook Lake, a prison complex that they had us in. The car slowed as they approached a red light, giving Dan a chance to study his father's expression. There was something there, a weight that Philip rarely shared, even with family. I'm not going to talk anymore about it because it's classified, but I doubt if it's the same family. Must be just a coincidence. Neither one of them made mention of, nor seemed like the type to be involved in electronics. Dan nodded, recognizing the dismissive tone his father used when a subject ventured too close to classified territory. Some doors remained locked, even within family. I imagine you intend to set aside funds for defense of the city when we get back to the office. You imagine right, Philip replied. We'll have Joseph and Patricia open the books as soon as we return. Onward to Elixir Corp, son. We've got a company to run here. But as the familiar silhouette of the Elixir building came into view, both men knew that running the company had just become infinitely more complicated. The war was coming home, and with it, all the ghosts and unfinished business that Philip Mitchell thought he'd left behind in Kalamazoo. The pamphlet in his pocket seemed to burn with possibility Rand Electronics, armaments from General Dynamic Land Systems, and the growing realization that the networks he'd built during the war might be exactly what Flint needed to survive what was coming. Chapter 9. As promised, Al and Falcon returned to work the following week at the Circle Drive Lumberyard, where they began to feel at home. Of course, they had a home at Elixir Corp. Inc. But their hearts were not in the brewing of potions. Their hearts were in the swing of the axe. Their boss, Doyle, became the bald-head uncle with tattooed knuckles that they never had. Of course, it wasn't life-fulfilling work, but they didn't look at it as labor. They looked at it more as recreation. Al was further relieved upon his return to hear that Carson had suddenly quit his job at the Circle Drive Lumberyard. The Mitchell brothers enthusiastically accepted the promotion from loaders to cut crew. It meant that every day they got to cruise in a van for 4 hours through the countryside of the state of Genesee, getting paid for a 10-hour work shift while actually only doing 6 hours of labor, plus breaks. Along with a bump in pay, it made it a pretty good deal. Doyle, furthermore, was eternally grateful to the Mitchell family for a check the Circle Drive Lumberyard received from Elixir Corp. Inc. On behalf of the Mitchell family, for allowing Al and Falcon to attend the victory parade in Kalamazoo. The morning fog clung to the tall pine trees as Al and Falcon Mitchell arrived in their cut crew van at the 4 spruce field. As they made the right-hand turn off North Genesee Road, Al observed what appeared to be a homeless man holding a cardboard sign that said, "Hungry, please spare change." He winked at him. He looked a bit young and a bit clean to be homeless, but he put it in the back of his mind. The van door slid open with its usual rust hinge groan as Al stepped out, work boots hitting the dirt with a thud. Falcon followed, stretching wide like he was preparing for a track meet instead of tree cutting. The morning fog at the 4 Mile Spruce Field was thick and unmoving, clinging to the limbs of every tree like a warning too quiet to hear. Eddie, Martinez, and Big Jim begun to unload their equipment from the back of the van. Al turned to Falcon and said, "I don't know why, but there's something odd about this day." Falcon continued his stretching. "Come on, bro. Your secret admirer doesn't work here anymore. So why do I still feel like I'm on the business end of the eyeball?" Al replied as he grabbed an axe from Big Jim. Falcon scratched his head. "If you're not smoking pot yet, maybe you should start considering it." As they headed deeper into the spruce field, the fog grew more intense. Visibility got lower with each step. The brothers glanced at each other, each with half of a mind to head back to the van, when suddenly, "Mitchells!" a voice cried out, but they couldn't tell from which direction. The fog cleared just enough to reveal the hooded figure of Carson, standing ominously with a machete in his hand. "What's with the machete? You going on a safari through the jungle or something? Your city is about to fall, Mitchell. I've come to offer you a choice. Join us or fall with it." Al was naturally confused. "You seem to be suffering from delusions of grandeur, Cupcake. It's 2 of us and only 1 of you. If you swing that little butter knife of yours like you swing an axe, I'm gonna mop the floor of this spruce field with your shit stain." Just as he said that, 20 cloaked figures emerged out of the fog. Eddie, Martinez, and Big Jim came running in. "You boys all right? We heard somebody yelling," Eddie said as he stopped and looked. Carson, before he could finish his sentence, one of the cloaked figures ran him through with a machete. The Mitchell brothers immediately went to work, axes in hand. "No!" Martinez shouted, but it was too late. Al and Falcon didn't need words. They were already in motion. The Mitchell brothers, ferocious, powerful, became a blur of strength and fury as they charged into the fray, axes raised high. The fog hanging over the field swallowed them whole as the fight erupted into chaos. Al's axe swung in a wide arc, cleaving through the air like a storm. A cloaked figure lunged toward him, but Al was faster. The machete clashed with the axe with a deafening ring, but Al drove his shoulder into the figure's chest, sending him flying backward. Falcon was right behind. His movements a fluid dance of power, each strike a seamless combination of force and precision. Falcon's axe collided with another attacker's blade, sparks flying as he twisted his body into the strike. His legs moved in a low, powerful sweep, knocking the figure's feet from under him. Before the attacker could react, Falcon was on him, pulling his weapon free with a brutal twist, slashing horizontally. The figure crumpled. The 2 brothers worked in sync, a deadly duo like wolves hunting a pack of sheep. Every strike was efficient, every movement calculated. Al moved with the grace of a seasoned warrior, his hands confident on the axe handle as he swung it wide. A figure rushed in, aiming for his head with a machete, but Al was already anticipating it. He ducked low and swept the axe in a clean arc, severing the figure's arm at the elbow. The cloaked man screamed in pain, but Al didn't hesitate. He spun on his heel, and with one brutal backhanded strike, the axe sunk into the figure's torso, dropping him to the ground. Falcon was always a step ahead. He fought with fluidity, his movements a series of controlled bursts. As one figure lunged, he sidestepped, letting the machete pass harmlessly by him. In a single motion, he locked his hands around the attacker's wrist, twisted it behind the man's back, and with a swift pull, ripped the machete free. Falcon slammed the handle into the figure's throat, forcing him to the ground before turning back to his brother. They were like a pair of deadly shadows, fast, efficient, and overwhelmingly strong. The cloaked figures didn't stand a chance, but the numbers were growing. Carson, still reeling from the last blow, staggered to his feet, his eyes wild with rage. The other cloaked figures had surrounded him, but he failed to move in coordination with them. He was fighting wild. His machete in hand, he roared, hacking toward Al with reckless abandon. Al didn't flinch. He pivoted, sidestepping Carson's wild swing, and in one motion brought his axe down across Carson's side. The sound was sickening, like wet wood cracking in two. Carson staggered, and in that instant, Al's axe drove into his chest, cutting through the ribs with a brutal finality. Eddie, still in shock, eventually rushed into the fray like a madman, but was quickly cut down by two cloaked figures, leaving only Al, Falcon, and Big Jim, the only members of the crew alive. But suddenly, the crew van came speeding in. Who could it be? We're the only ones left, Falcon thought to himself. It was the homeless guy. Get in. There wasn't a second to debate. They all got into the van and sped away. The van's engine hummed as they sped away from the Four-Mile spruce field, leaving behind the fog-shrouded battlefield and the bodies of their fallen crewmates. Al sat in the passenger seat, his knuckles white as he gripped the door handle, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Blood spattered his work shirt and his axe lay across his lap, its blade stained crimson. "Listen up, Dr. Fu," Al said, turning to face their mysterious rescuer. "I saw you before we pulled into the spruce field, holding that sign. You're too clean and drive too damn well to be some homeless guy. Who the hell are you?" The driver's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, but Al caught the slight smile that crossed his lips. "My name is David Chen. I am a Genesee Codastic observer. The city of Flint is under attack." Big Jim, squeezed into the back seat next to Falcon, let out a bitter laugh. "That's bullshit. An attack? By who? Those clowns back there with the machetes?" Taking one hand off the wheel, David Chen reached over and turned on the radio. Static filled the van for a moment before a familiar voice cut through. "This is Dave Hopkins with a WTRX 1330 AM breaking news update." The brothers fell silent. "We are reporting live on a developing situation in Flint, Genesee. The city is under heavy attack from a force that has been described as heavily armed, cloaked individuals believed to be Azurite aligned. These soldiers launched a brutal offensive from the north early this morning, moving swiftly in armored vehicles that appear to have descended from unknown locations. Reports indicate that amphibious assault vehicles have been deployed, storming from the Flint and Chrysler rivers as thousands of soldiers invade via boats of some kind." Falcon's face went pale. "Thousands?" The west side of the city is experiencing fierce combat. Heavy artillery and firefights are taking place in multiple areas. We've been told by sources within the police department that protective zones are being established from Kearsley Street through downtown Flint, with the authorities urging citizens to stay indoors for their safety. Al felt his stomach drop. His family, his mother, Dan. In these unprecedented times, the Flint Sheriff's Department and the East 3rd Militia are showing remarkable resistance against this overwhelming assault. Though the situation remains fluid, we are getting reports that the militia, along with law enforcement, have set up strong defensive positions and are holding their ground unbelievably well against this yet-to-be-identified enemy. Big Jim leaned forward. "East 3rd Militia? Those weekend warriors?" Officials are urging all residents of Flint and the surrounding areas to remain indoors and avoid any unnecessary travel. Law enforcement is advising citizens to lock doors, stay away from windows, and await further instructions as they continue to assess the full scope of this attack. More updates will follow as information becomes available. The radio crackled with static before the reporter's voice returned. "This is a developing situation. Please stay tuned to WTRX 1330 for continuous coverage." David Chen turned down the volume and addressed the Mitchell brothers directly. "We have reason to believe that you are under observation by the Clio Spire Guard." "The who?" Falcon asked. "The force attacking your city. Carson was one of their agents. They've been watching you." Al's jaw clenched. "I knew there was something off about that little weasel." Big Jim shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We need to get back to Circle Drive and make sure the Doyle is okay." David Chen nodded. "Circle Drive is a wise choice. It's south of where most of the battle is taking place." An hour and a half later, they pulled into the familiar gravel lot of Circle Drive lumber yards. The sight of Doyle's office lights still on brought a wave of relief to all three workers. They found their boss hunched over his desk radio, his tattooed knuckles wrapped around a coffee mug as he listened intently to the news reports. "Boys!" Doyle looked up as they entered, his weathered face creased with worry. "Thank God you're alive. How is the rest of the crew? Eddie, Martinez." "They didn't make it," Al said quietly. Doyle nodded grimly. "Son of a damn bitch," he gestured to the radio. "Been listening to this all morning. Sounds like a goddamn war zone out there." Falcon moved to the office phone. "I need to call home." "Go ahead, son." Falcon dialed the familiar number for Elixir Corp. Inc. After 2 rings, Patricia's voice came through, strained but steady. "Elixir Corporation, Patricia speaking." "Patricia, it's Falcon. Where's my father?" "Falcon, thank God you're safe. Your father is defending the area. We've established a safe zone around here. You boys ought to be safe. He would want you to come here." "Is everyone else?" "Your mother and Dan are here." "Your father, he's handling things. Just get here safely." Falcon hung up and turned to his brother. "They're alive. Dad's fighting." Doyle stood up, his chair creaking. "Take the van. Get to your family. That's where you belong right now." "What about you?" Big Jim asked. "I'll be fine. Got my shotgun and enough stubbornness to outlast whatever those bastards throw at me." Doyle's grin was fierce. "Besides, someone's got to keep an eye on the lumber. Can't have them burning down honest work." The drive to Elixir Corp. Inc. took them through neighborhoods that looked like war zones. Smoke rose from several buildings, and they passed 2 overturned cars before David Chen found a route that avoided the worst of the fighting. The familiar sight of the Elixir building brought both relief and shock. Sandbags had been stacked around the entrance, and armed figures moved along the rooftop. As they approached the main entrance, the sound of gunfire erupted from the north side of the building. Al and Falcon exchanged glances before jumping out of the van and running toward the sound. They rounded the corner to witness their father, rifle in hand, methodically picking off Clio Spire Guard soldiers who were attempting to advance across the parking lot. The sight that truly surprised them, however, was their older brother Dan, positioned on an elevated loading dock, still wearing his business suit but now sporting a bulletproof vest. His red tie was slightly askew as he handled a shotgun with surprising competence, covering their father's flanks. "Dan knows how to shoot?" Falcon whispered in amazement. "My God, he went from counting beans to counting bullets," Al replied, hefting his blood-stained axe. Philip Mitchell's voice carried over the gunfire. "That's far enough, you mystic jackasses. Fall back or we'll put you down where you stand." The Clio Spire Guards, perhaps recognizing they were outgunned and outmaneuvered, began a tactical retreat. Their organized withdrawal spoke to military training, but also to the unexpected level of resistance they'd encountered. Dan lowered his shotgun and called down to his father. "They're pulling back to the north." Philip nodded, then spotted his younger sons approaching. His expression shifted from tactical commander to concerned father in an instant. "Al, Falcon, what the hell are you doing here?" "We just got back from the spruce field," Al said, holding up his axe. "Had our own welcoming committee." Philip's eyes took in the blood on their clothes, the weapons in their hands, and the grim expressions on their faces. Something shifted in his demeanor, a recognition that his sons were no longer boys to be protected, but men who had already proven themselves in battle. "Inside," he said simply. "All of us. We need to talk." As they moved toward the building's entrance, David Chen emerged from the van, his observer's robes now visible beneath his discarded homeless disguise. Philip Mitchell stopped dead in his tracks, a caustic observer. "Indeed," David Chen replied with a slight bow. "And we have much to discuss, Mr. Mitchell. The attack on your city is far from over." Chapter 10, Elixir Corp. Inc. Building. Inside of the Elixir Corp. Inc. building, power ran at only 63%. The Clio Spire Guard hit a crucial neighborhood power grid prior to their attack, which left several city blocks in the area without power. The building was operating on backup generators. Some of the lights flickered on and off as they made their way to what appeared to be a board meeting room. Before entering the room, Philip Mitchell stopped at Patricia Reynolds' desk. Without asking for permission, he opened her desk drawer and pulled out a bottle of liquor. He whispered to Patricia, "Under the circumstances, I'm sure Cookie won't mind." She nodded her head and continued her work. "Everybody have a seat," Philip said, gesturing to a large table. Philip took a seat in between Dan and Al, opened the bottle, and took a swig. He looked to David Chen and asked, "Why is a codastic observer driving my boys around a battle zone?" "My name is David Chen, and as you have observed, I am a Genesee codastic observer. It's come to our understanding that the Clio Spire Guard has been watching your sons. They believe they tie to a prophecy we call the Axe of Genesee, the Anvil's Axe," Joseph Mitchell said out loud. "Exactly," David replied. Al rubbed his temple. "How do you guys know about all this stuff?" Philip interrupted. "Son, grown-ups are talking. At this point in the game, it's best that you're seen, not heard." Al was instantly silenced. David Chen sat at the table with his eyes closed for a long moment. Dan looked at him and said, You need an espresso or anything? He's reading us, son." Philip replied. David opened his eyes with an expression on his face, as if he'd reached a new level of enlightenment. He looked to Philip. "You're the returning draftee that we felt." Philip replied, "I'm guessing when you say we, you mean the other Genesee codastic observers." "Yes," David answered. "It's beginning to make sense. I was tracking the movements of one of the members of the Clio Spire Guard named Carson, a guardsman that your son made quick work of, by the way." He smiled at Al. "The Clio Spire Guard is under the belief that one of your sons is the Anvil axe wielder. I saw the potential when I observed him in battle." "Battle?" Philip replied. David held up his hand. "But he's not the awakener. You're the only A100 Prime in the room." Dan grabbed the bottle in front of his father and took a swig. "How many of you guys are there?" "Genesee codastic observers? I mean," Falcon asked. As Philip shot him, one of those sons shut the hell up glances. "Enough," David replied with a sly grin. Al then grabbed the bottle in front of his father and took a swig. He shuddered as the contents went down his throat. Philip chuckled. "Some of Cookie's special stock reserve." He turned to David. "So you observed my boys in battle?" "Yes," David said. Before he could continue, he turned to Al and Falcon and said, "Your mother is word sick about you boys. I'd like for you to go to my office and comfort her while I talk to our new friend for a while." "Come on, Papa Bear," Al replied. Philip didn't need to say a word. His glance said everything that needed to be heard. Al and Falcon left the room. Philip turned to Joseph and said, "Those boys are growing up a little too fast for my taste." As they both chuckled, David continued, "Bound in the pattern of an architectural helix, a song of ancestry sung in the marrow of the land, that clearly refers to a 100 Prime." Joseph replied. David looked at Joseph in astonishment. "Where did you study?" he asked. "The Elijah Elk Cultural Center, near the Pleasant Mountains. Our grandfather sent us there a long time ago. Old Philly boy here was kicked out after an altercation with the tribal police." "Don't remind me," Philip replied. "Tell me about this battle that my boys were involved in," Philip asked David. "The Clio Spire Guard are always on the lookout for gifted young men," David said. "Their leader, Commander Vors Tellic, is an amateur codastic practitioner. Recently, your sons caught the attention of one of their spies, an individual by the name of Carson, who had gained employment at the Circle Drive lumber yards. My fellow observers and I noticed a faint rhythmic pulse in Kodos when you returned from Kalamazoo, but it disappeared when you went back for the victory parade. Carson can't detect codosic pulses like we can. He thought your sons had quit their job, so he quit as well and began searching for them throughout the streets of Flint. When he received word that they had returned to work, just on the cusp of the Clio Spire Guard invasion of Flint, naturally, he took a regiment of guardsmen to the spruce fields to try and recruit them. I've read my boys their entire lives, Philip replied. All of them. Al and Falcon had a bit more of the cadastic spark than Dan here. So naturally, as I began to learn hand-to-hand combat techniques, I'd come home and share what little I knew with them. Al in particular. Falcon was still a bit young, but I guess what I wasn't able to show Falcon in my absence, Al was. So it makes sense. Thank you for intervening. I know that your job is to observe, not fight. I didn't fight, Dave replied. The victory is all in the hands of your boys. They show potential to be great warriors. They are wielders, but you are the awakener. Patricia entered the room. Excuse the interruption. Mr. Mitchell, you have a phone call from Sergeant Norvell Stern from the East 3rd Militia. He's on hold. Line 3. Thank you, Miss Reynolds. Excuse me a moment. Philip picked up the phone and pressed line 3. Hey, Sergeant. Mitchell here. Good morning, Mr. Mitchell. My boys would not have been able to hold off the Clio Spire Guard as well as they have without your help. I just wanted to offer my personal thanks to you. No problem, Philip replied. Thank you, Sergeant, for sending a few of your boys my way to help me defend my building. I bet the Clio Spire Guard was pretty surprised to see lab rats with shotguns. Those armaments and vests your boys gave us came in pretty handy. I'm glad to see a return on your investment, Sergeant Stern chuckled. Fresh rifles from General Dynamic Land Systems, and we've been able to track the Guard's vehicle movement courtesy of the radars we purchased from Rand Electronics. Philip paused. That equipment that you bought from Rand Electronics. The connection wouldn't have happened to be with a fella named Doyon Rand, would it? No, the sergeant replied. We got our order from a fella named Douglas, but there was a different guy that delivered them. Hey, Lester, what was that guy's name? Tony, I think it was, Sergeant. Philip thought to himself, well, that takes care of that. Would have been nice. The grant funding and your donations came right on time, Sergeant Stern continued. We were able to secure makeshift blockades at key strategic points, cut off Clio Spire Guard reinforcements, and jam communications transmissions. I think the time has come to update your command center, Sergeant. I want to talk to you about new potential locations. Swing by my office later on and we'll discuss it. I'm in the middle of a board meeting right now, so I'll catch you later. No problem, Mr. Mitchell, Sergeant Stern replied. Enjoy the day as best you can, sir. You too, Sergeant. Philip hung up the phone. Joseph slapped the palm of his hand on the table. My big brother, defender of the state. Who would have thought? Dan took another swig from the bottle. Why is this my life? Philip chuckled. David stood up from his chair. I'm afraid I have to commune with my fellow observers. We will keep an eye on the Mitchell family. I'm curious to how these future scenarios will unfold. Me as well, David, Philip replied. Me as well. Clio Spire Guard, Forward Staging Assembly, Northern Flint. A not too particularly thrilled Commander Vors Tellic paced the rooftop of the Bryant Center on Pearson Road amongst his gathered war council, dragging his Tel Valis pike as a trail of sparks followed him in pace. Would anyone care to explain to me why I'm dragging my Tel Valis pike on the rooftop of the Bryant Center and not dragging it on the rooftop of Flint City Hall? One of his lieutenants stammered as he responded. We believe a recent surge in funding for the East 3rd Militia has allowed them to acquire a more superior military capability than we've come to expect. Perhaps if we, before he can complete his sentence, enraged Commander Vors Tellic chucked his spear pike directly through the abdomen of the lieutenant, impaling him to a nearby supply crate. Failure in retrieving me to Mitchell Brothers. Failure in retrieving me to City of Flint. Failure in retrieving me to proper intel on the East 3rd Militia. Does your impotence know no bounds? Frank Fronten, facing his commander. It truly pains me to see your consonants so low. This is a mere hiccup, Commander. Our foothold on the north is steady. No mere surge in funding can account for their inferiority in numbers. A reanalyzation in strategy will assure that in due time, Spire banners shall wave east, west, north, and south. The city will be yours in full, my dear Commander, given the proper time allotment. Commander Tellic scowled. Consider yourself fortunate, Frank, that I've already murdered one of my subordinates in rage and can't afford to lose another. Otherwise, you would find yourself on the other end of my pike. Frank Fronton gestured his hands in mock surrender. I only wish to see you pleased, my dear Commander. Gethin Mine reported. We have dozens of prisoners, Commander, that we believe are dense with Kodos. Perhaps they can shed more light on the prophecy you've been researching. If we can find the wielders of the axe, it would most certainly turn circumstances in our favor. Indeed it shall, Gethin. Begin your interrogations immediately. Meanwhile, we shall, as Frank so elegantly put it, reanalyze our strategy. Maintain this stronghold on the north. Expansion plans are underway. This city will be mine. Chapter 11. Supply Line Defense. South Flint. Morning after the Clio Spire Guard assault. Lester, of the East 3rd Militia, checked his watch for the third time in 2 minutes. The delivery from General Dynamic Land Systems was running late, and with Clio Spire Guard forces still entrenched in the north, every second of delay put the entire operation at risk. It would have been much easier and faster to transport these armaments using Interrail tram. However, these armaments classified as industrial cargo, which would have required transport to the State Street Station, which is in Clio Spire Guard occupied Northern Territory, should have been here 12 minutes ago, he muttered to David Breed, who was positioned across Saginaw Street with a clear view of both approaches. Relax, Breed's voice crackled through the radio. They're using the highways rather than the trams. It's going to take more time for them to arrive. The convoy finally appeared, 10 transport trucks with trailers attached, carrying 3 newly manufactured Hummers, each courtesy of the East 3rd Militia's recent funding windfall. All state-of-the-art, nothing outdated. A straightforward military equipment delivery, all made possible through funding provided by Drilling Flint Consortium, Elixera Corp. Inc., and government grants procured by District 8 Representative Hector Hayes. Lester waved the lead truck forward. About damn time. That's when he spotted the movement on the rooftop across the street, a glint of metal that didn't belong. Breed, we got company. 2 o'clock, 3rd building. I see him. Looks like 7, maybe 10. The Clio Spire Guard had been waiting too. The first shot rang out just as the lead truck reached the intersection. The bullet sparked off the truck's hood, and the driver, a civilian contractor who definitely wasn't paid enough for this dove for cover behind his cab. So much for an easy delivery, Lester said, drawing his rifle. The weapon felt solid in his hands, one of the benefits of the militia's recent equipment upgrade. Breed was already moving, using the parked cars for cover as he flanked toward the guard's position. Keep them busy. I'll circle around. Lester fired 3 controlled shots toward the rooftop, more to keep the guards' heads down than to hit anything. The drivers were scrambling to move their trucks out of the kill zone, engines roaring as they reversed toward better cover. This is what we get for being predictable, Lester called out. They knew we'd be here. 5 more guards emerged from an alley, trying to get closer to the trucks. Lester adjusted his aim and fired. His shot caught one in the shoulder, sending him spinning back into cover. From across the street, Breed's rifle barked twice. One of the rooftop guards pitched forward, his weapon clattering down to the pavement below. Take that, you sons of bitches, Breed said to himself. The remaining guards, realizing what a bad predicament they were in, began falling back. It wasn't the disciplined military retreat they'd shown yesterday. This felt more like a desperate probe that had gone wrong. Within minutes, the street was quiet again. Lester emerged from cover, rifle still ready. Well, that was educational. The truck drivers, shaken but unharmed, were already back at their vehicles. One of them, a grizzled veteran who'd probably seen worse, just shrugged and said, "Where do you want this stuff unloaded?" Elixera Corp. Inc. Dispatch Yard, just on the outskirts. Our contact's name is Cookie, Follow us. We'll get you there, Lester replied as he summoned forth 2 militia privates. Set up flank in the rear. Make sure no one damages our new toys from behind. Breed jogged over, checking the fallen guard's equipment. They're getting sloppy. This wasn't a real attack, more like they were testing our response time. Or seeing what we're bringing in, Lester said, watching the 2 privates position themselves behind the convoy. Either way, Sergeant Stern's gonna want to hear about this. As they policed the area and collected intelligence from the failed ambush, both men knew this was just the beginning. The Clio Spire Guard wasn't giving up, they were adapting. And so was the East 3rd Militia, Elixara Corp. Inc. Dispatch Yard. Cookie, Dan, Philip, and Al spent the better part of the morning rearranging trucks in the yard, a tighter fit to squeeze in 30 additional vehicles. Al had never truly driven before. It was ironic to him that the first thing he'd be driving were Bobcat semi-trucks at his dad's yard. After stalling out a couple of times, Cookie gave him some startup lessons on shifting the gears. Don't take your foot off that brake until you hit that clutch, Al. Don't grind my transmissions, boy. Eventually, Cookie surrendered to only letting Al drive in first gear. Keep it under 5 and stay alive, young fella. I'd hate to see that boy dragging a 40 behind him, he thought to himself. Sergeant Norvell Stern was vigilant, maintaining a visual range of his men just outside of the yard, constructing a makeshift sandbag checkpoint. Philip Mitchell walked over to Sergeant Stern. Why don't skeletons fight each other, Stern? He said as he handed him a cold beer. Excuse me, sir? Stern replied. Skeletons, why don't they fight each other, Sergeant? I have no idea why, Mr. Mitchell. Because they don't have the guts. He chuckled to himself like he just dropped a bombshell of a punchline. When he noticed the deadpan expression on the sergeant's face, he patted him on the shoulder. It's an acquired taste. Not the beer, my jokes. Sergeant Stern chuckled as he placed his untouched beer on a nearby yard ramp. Durant High School recently closed. You should apply for a city permit to use it as a temporary headquarters. You've got a bigger staff and inventory now, Sergeant, and you can't keep putting all of your toys in my box. I'll get Lester right on it when he arrives with the convoy. Given the current set of circumstances, I doubt we'll have too much trouble getting the city clerk's office to red stamp this quickly, the sergeant replied. Cookie approached Philip, wiping off some sort of grease on his hand with a towel. Truck 24 still got a bad front passenger side axle. I had one of my boys cut a piece of the fence post and welded it to the frame. It's moved now. We've got enough space for all incoming vehicles. Cookie looked at the sergeant's untouched beer. Well, ain't that a pity, he said as he grabbed a bottle and started drinking the content. Cookie looked inside the beer bottle. Well, Mr. Mitchell, it looks like you've jumped right out of the shit and into the frying pan. With all of this going on, right after you returned from draft duty, Sergeant Stern cocked his head. Draft duty? You were in Kalamazoo? Unfortunately, I was, Sergeant. Got a letter from the office of Drake Call in the middle of the conflict, informing me that my services were required, and to report to the Saginaw Street IRT station, no luggage, immediate summons. Did you serve under call? The sergeant asked. Not directly. Did do a few helicopter missions with him, though. I didn't want to bring it up at the 8th District, at least not with Call on the line, because I thought I might disrespect the man. I always despised him for dragging me away from home. But as events carry on, I begin to see the necessity. Maybe it's not that Drake Call summoned me. Maybe it was Kodos to give me experience and perspective. For example, the Clio Spire Guard operates similar to the way the Raines brothers operate in Kalamazoo. They pick on weaker, smaller groups, take what they can out of them, and get rid of the rest. But eventually, the little dog grows his teeth, begins to growl. That's what's going on in Kalamazoo right now. The Silver Domes of Yaktown set off that explosion at the parade to frame the Raines brothers because of the way they were treated by them, which is why our pal Drake Call can't be here now, which is why I'm standing here partially doing his job, which is more reason to not like the bastard. I imagine, as they often do, the Azurites will begin to turn on each other. That'll be your moment right there, Sergeant. They observed from inside of the gate as a convoy arrived at the checkpoint, led by Lester and David Breed. Dan Mitchell walked outside of the gate to check the vehicles before he let them in the yard. Lester and Breed gave a snappy salute to Sergeant Stern. "We've got 30 units, sir." "Great job, fellas," the sergeant replied. "I want you to head down to City Hall, have a chat with the clerk, and get a permit for us to set up a temporary headquarters at the abandoned Durant High School." Dan chimed in. "Take my assistant Patricia with you. She's pretty good at cutting through bureaucratic red tape. And if any more coins are needed, she can get us the proper information as well as bargain for us." "Sure thing, Dan," Lester replied, shaking his hand firmly and heading out. The glowing Genesee sun above him, heading for its alignment with the noon hour, and the East 3rd Militia was that much more prepared than they were the previous day. The Clio Spire Guard, Flint City, Northern Stronghold, the Bryant Center, on Pearson Street. As he observed the prisoner bound by his hands and feet, sitting in the tub filled to his shoulders with water, Gethin Mind placed a large styrofoam cup of ice and a yellowish fluid on the ground. "That looks uncomfortable," he remarked. Whatever was in the cup was harsh and smelled strong. His tone was eerily cold as he wiped some of the cup's condensation off his hand. "What do you do for a living?" "I work for the Genesee State Historic Society," the prisoner gasped. "This might be your lucky day," Gethin replied. "Are there any historic axe wielders of the Genesee area that you're aware of?" "Axe wielders?" the prisoner replied, confusion evident in his voice. Gethin dunked the prisoner's head beneath the water, holding him down briefly before pulling him back up, sputtering and gasping. "Let me ask again," Gethin said, his voice maintaining that same cold monotone. "Historic axe wielders, warriors, legends, anything." I don't understand what you mean," the prisoner choked out, water streaming down his face. "There are lumberjacks in the records, but..." Down he went again, this time a little bit longer. When Gethin pulled him up, the man was panicking, hyperventilating. "Please," the prisoner begged. "I don't know what you want me to say. Think harder." Gethin picked up the cup and took a slow sip of the yellowish liquid. "Ancient weapons, cults, religious practices involving bladed implements." The prisoner's eyes widened slightly. Wait. There might be something. In the old archives, there were some references to weapon worship, but it was from a completely different culture. Go on. Gethin set the cup down, leaning forward with interest. The Kusanagi no Tsurugi. It was a weapons worshiping cult from Ashari, but that's not even from this region. It's... Gethin's hand shot out, gripping the prisoner's hair. "Where did they operate?" I remember reading about meetings. They would have gatherings at Mount Morris, but this was centuries ago. It has nothing to do with... The prisoner's head went under again. This time, Gethin held him down until the man's struggles became frantic, desperate. When he finally pulled him up, the historian was barely conscious. "The location?" Gethin said simply. "Where exactly at Mount Morris?" The old coal mine," the prisoner gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's an abandoned coal mine. The records mentioned a subterranean temple, but it's probably collapsed by now. Please, I'm telling you everything I know." "Subterranean temple at Mount Morris," Gethin repeated slowly, as if savoring the words. "In an abandoned coal mine. Yes. That's all I know about any weapon worship in the area. Please, I've told you everything." Gethin stood up, a satisfied smile crossing his face. "Indeed you have." He left the prisoner bound in the tub and climbed the stairs to the upper floors of the Bryant Center, where Commander Tellic had established his temporary command post. "Commander," Gethin announced as he entered the room, "the interrogation has yielded useful intelligence." Tellic looked up from his maps, Frank Fronton standing nearby with his characteristic expression of feigned interest. "Proceed," Tellic commanded. The prisoner, a historian from the Genesee State Historic Society, confirmed the existence of an ancient weapons cult called the Kusanagi no Tsurugi from Ashari. They conducted rituals at Mount Morris in what the prisoner described as a subterranean temple. Mount Morris? Tellic said, his eyes gleaming. Where is this temple? Located within an abandoned coal mine, sir. The prisoner indicated the cult held their meetings there centuries ago. Frank Fronton stepped forward with his usual manipulative grace. How delightfully convenient, Commander. It seems the prophecy and the historical record are beginning to align in ways that are most encouraging. Tellic's hand moved to the hilt of his Tel Vallis pike. Mount Morris. Of course. The Anvil Stone, the prophecy, and now a subterranean temple of weapon worshippers. The pieces are falling into place. He turned to Gethin with cold determination. Prepare the men for a northward advance. We move on Mount Morris within the hour. What would you like me to do with the prisoner, sir? Gethin asked. Tellic didn't hesitate. Execute him. Gethin nodded and headed back toward the stairs, leaving Tellic and Fronton to plan their assault on the ancient temple hidden beneath Mount Morris. Chapter 12. Location: Stepping Stone Falls, north of Flint. Observation point: High Ridge Overlook. The mist from Stepping Stone Falls created a natural veil around the 5 Genesee Codostic observers as they stood on the rocky outcropping, their robes damp from the spray. Below them, the winding road that led north toward Mount Morris stretched like a serpent through the wooded valley. The rumble of heavy vehicles had drawn them here, a convoy of Clio Spire Guard trucks and armored personnel carriers, moving with military precision toward their ancient destination. Elder Marcus Webb raised his weathered hand, shielding his eyes from the morning sun as he counted the vehicles. 82 trucks, 50 APCs. They're not simply patrolling anymore. This is a full expedition force. Mira Thorne stood at the edge of the precipice, her long gray hair whipping in the wind created by the falls. Her ancient eyes tracked the convoy's movement with the intensity of a hawk. The pattern has changed. Yesterday they sought to dominate Flint through brute force. Today they abandoned that prize for something greater. Sister Catherine Morse turned sharply toward the group, her hood falling back to reveal eyes blazing with righteous concern. And David Chen made contact with the Mitchell family. He broke our sacred covenant of non-interference. Her voice carried over the roar of the water. For 60 generations, the observers have maintained their distance from destiny's unfolding. We witness, we record, we preserve, but we do not act. Elder Webb's expression remained calm, but his voice carried the authority of decades spent interpreting Kodos' will. Sister Catherine, what would you have had him do? Allow Philip Mitchell's sons to die in that forest? Sometimes destiny requires a guiding hand, not merely watching eyes. Mira Thorne nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the disappearing convoy. Marcus speaks wisdom. David's intervention may have been the very action Kodos required. Without it, the bloodline might have been severed before the awakening could occur. Thomas Kell, who had been silent during the exchange, suddenly stiffened as if struck by lightning. His wise face went pale, and his eyes took on the distant quality that marked a vision in progress. The others immediately gathered around him, forming a protective circle as he swayed on his feet. Thomas, Mira whispered urgently, what do you see? When Thomas spoke, his voice carried an otherworldly resonance. Underground chambers, carved stone. The Anvil Stone altar beneath Mount Morris. His breath came in short gasps. They know. Commander Tellic, he's found references to the ancient site. Not the full prophecy, but enough. They're gonna excavate. Sister Catherine's face went ashen. The Anvil Stone? They've discovered its location? Thomas blinked, returning to normal awareness, but still shaken by the intensity of his vision. Not just its location. I saw Tellic speaking with someone, a scholar, maybe a historian. They believe that the stone requires a wielder to activate its power. Elder Webb stroked his beard thoughtfully. But do they know the specific requirements? That only an A100 Prime can awaken the stone? That I could not see clearly. Thomas admitted. But their urgency suggests they understand the stone's importance, even if they don't fully comprehend the process. Sister Catherine began pacing along the rocky ledge, her robe snapping in the mist-laden breeze. This changes nothing. Even if the Clio Spire Guard knows of the Anvil Stone, they remain ignorant of the true Awakener and the wielders. Perhaps we should simply allow events to unfold naturally. Kodos will protect its chosen. Elder Webb turned to face her fully, his expression grave. Sister Catherine, I must remind you of something crucial. Philip Mitchell is not the only A100 Prime in Genesee. There are others, men and women, with the genetic markers necessary to awaken the stone. What if the Clio Spire Guard captures one of them? What if they force the awakening under their control? The implication hung in the air like the mist around them. Mira Thorne's eyes widened with understanding. An A100 Prime of questionable moral character, she murmured. Or one coerced through threats to family, torture, mind-altering substances. Exactly, Webb continued. We have identified Philip Mitchell as a man of integrity, a protector, someone whose heart aligns with Kodos' natural flow. If we allow the Clio Spire Guard to find and corrupt another A100 Prime, the awakening could serve darkness instead of light. Thomas Kell looked between the elder and Sister Catherine. Then David's contact with the Mitchells wasn't a violation of our covenant. It was the first step in ensuring the prophecy unfolds correctly. Sister Catherine stopped pacing and stared out at the valley where the convoy had disappeared. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with the weight of decision. You're suggesting we abandon White Clan of passive observation. I'm suggesting, Elder Webb said gently, that sometimes the greatest service to destiny is ensuring it has the proper vessel. David has already made the initial contact. The Mitchell family trusts him. If we're going to act, it must be now, while we can still guide events toward the proper outcome. Mira Thorne turned from the precipice, her weathered face set with determination. The vision I shared in the sacred grove spoke of two paths, one leading to balance and protection, the other to corruption and domination. We now stand at the crossroads between those paths. David Chen, Elder Webb called out, his voice carrying across the observation point. The youngest observer had remained silent during their debate, but now stepped forward with visible apprehension. Elder Webb? You've already crossed the threshold between observer and participant. The Mitchell family knows you, trusts you. Will you accept the responsibility of ensuring they understand what approaches? David Chen looked out toward Mount Morris, then back at the assembled observers. The weight of their collective gaze seemed to settle on his shoulders like a mantle of destiny. What would you have me tell them? Elder Webb's smile was both sad and proud. The truth, that the Clio Spire Guard marches toward an ancient site of power. That Philip Mitchell carries within his bloodline the key to awakening that power. And that time grows short for him to accept his role as the awakener before others, with less noble intentions, claim that destiny for themselves. Sister Catherine closed her eyes and bowed her head. May Kodos forgive us if we're wrong, and may Kodos guide us if we're right, Mira Thorne added softly. Thomas Kell pointed toward the distant road. Look, another convoy, smaller but moving fast. They're in a hurry to reach Mount Morris. Elder Webb nodded grimly. Then it's decided. David, return to the Mitchell family immediately. The awakening of the Anvil Stone is no longer a distant prophecy. It's an imminent reality. And Philip Mitchell must be prepared to face his destiny before the Clio Spire Guard forces that destiny upon someone else. As David Chen began his descent down the treacherous path toward the valley floor, the remaining 4 observers maintained their vigil at Stepping Stone Falls. The mist continued to rise from the churning water below, but now it seemed to carry whispers of the ancient forces stirring beneath Mount Morris forces that would soon require a worthy vessel to channel their power toward light instead of darkness. The age of passive observation was ending. The legend of the Axe of Genesee was about to begin in earnest. The revelation at Durant High. Location: abandoned Durant High School, New East 3rd Militia Headquarters. The old basketball court of Durant High School buzzed with military efficiency as squads of militia members packed crates of weapons near the former ambulance entrance. The familiar sounds of preparation for war echoed off the gymnasium walls, the metallic click of ammunition being counted, the rustle of tactical gear being sorted, and the low murmur of men discussing strategy. Al and Falcon Mitchell worked alongside the militia members, their recent experience with the Clio Spire Guard having earned them an unspoken respect among the fighters. An unnamed militia member paused in his work to address the brothers. "Are you boys part of the East Third now?" Al looked up from the crate he was loading, his expression characteristically sardonic. "I've sworn no oaths here." He glanced over at his brother. "Did you, Falcon?" Falcon shook his head. "Nope. We're only here because some mystical gaggle of jackasses from Clio decided that they liked the way we chop wood." Al continued, hefting another weapon into the crate. "Maybe they want us to help them build a log cabin. Who knows? But they threatened my city, so they threatened my family. I'm here to help you boys kick their ass. I'm not here to play tin soldier." The militia member grinned and returned to his work, understanding the brother's position perfectly. Across the gymnasium, in what had once been the coach's office, Sergeant Norvell, Stern, and Lester hunched over a table scattered with surveillance photographs alongside Dan and Philip Mitchell. The images showed the Clio Spire Guard's movements over the past 48 hours, and the pattern was puzzling. "I can't make heads or tails of it," Lester said, rubbing his temples. "They've got enough numbers to counter any resistance we put up. Why would they just abandon their efforts like this and head north? They've already taken Beecher. Something is definitely not right." Philip picked up one of the surveillance photos, studying the face captured in the black and white image. "And who's this charming fellow again?" "That's Captain Frank Fronten," Stern replied. "We believe he's Commander Vors Tellic's right-hand man. For reasons unknown to us, Franz stayed behind at the Bryant Center with a small regiment of guardsmen." David Breed entered the makeshift command center and took a seat at the table. "We're packing up armaments now and preparing to head up there to see if we can kill or apprehend him." Dan leaned back in his chair, his business mind working through the tactical implications. Maybe he's staying behind for some future plan of return by the Clio Spire Guard. Breed's smile turned wicked. Fronten is about to become privy to the simple fact that there is no future for him. Lester nodded approvingly. "With the Clio Spire Guard's loosened stronghold to the north, we can now securely have our armaments shipped to the State Street IRT station. It ought to make logistics easier." Philip's expression grew more serious. "Any word on the hostages they've taken prisoner?" "No," Lester replied grimly, "but it's likely that they're being held at the Bryant Center. Our surveillance teams haven't reported any movement of prisoners yet." A militia member called out from across the gymnasium. "We're ready to rock and roll, sir." Breed stood up, his smile returning. "That's my cue. I'm gonna go extend a generous foot to Frank Fronten's ass." "I'll fill you in on the details as they develop, Sergeant." He departed with a crisp salute. Stern turned back to the surveillance photos. "We have reason to believe that the Spire Guard commander is an amateur codostic practitioner. We don't know his level of ability, but he may have had some sort of prophetic vision that led him to abandon Flint and head north." Just then, a mysterious cloaked figure walked into the gymnasium. Instantly, weapons trained on him from multiple directions. The figure casually lifted his hands in the air as he continued walking toward the command table, seemingly unperturbed by the lethal attention focused on him. "How did you get through my checkpoints?" Sergeant Stern demanded, his hand moving to his sidearm. The cloaked figure lowered his hood, revealing the familiar face of David Chen. Philip Mitchell's eyes widened with recognition. "David Chen?" Stern turned to Philip, suspicion evident in his voice. "You know him?" David Chen addressed Philip directly, ignoring the weapons still trained on him. "I need to speak with you privately, Mr. Mitchell." Sergeant Stern stepped forward aggressively. "I don't know who the fuck this guy is. How did he get through my checkpoints?" Philip Mitchell extended his pinky finger toward the sergeant with a slight smile. "Pull my finger, Sergeant." "What?" Stern replied, confusion replacing anger. Pull my finger. As Stern reluctantly pulled Philip's finger, a gentle yellow mist surrounded the table, swirling with an otherworldly luminescence before dissipating harmlessly. The sergeant stared in amazement, his tactical mind struggling to process what he just witnessed. Philip's voice carried quiet authority. "Can you do that, Sergeant?" When Stern remained speechless, Philip continued. "You made mention of the Clio Spire Guard's commander being a codostic practitioner. Since no one else in here except for me and this gentleman have even an inkling of knowledge about the practice, maybe you should allow us to chat in private." Sergeant Stern looked between Philip and David Chen, weighing his options. Finally, his pragmatic nature won out. "You can use the kitchen behind the cafeteria." The kitchen. Private conference. The abandoned school kitchen felt hollow and sterile, its industrial fixtures casting long shadows in the dim emergency lighting. Philip Mitchell and David Chen sat across from each other at a stainless steel prep table, the weight of unspoken revelations hanging between them. Philip broke the silence first. "All right, David, you risked getting shot by walking into a militia stronghold. You somehow bypassed trained sentries without raising an alarm, and you specifically requested to speak with me about codostic matters." He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "What's this really about?" David Chen took a deep breath, the burden of his mission evident in his posture. "Mr. Mitchell, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to listen with an open mind, because the fate of Genesee and perhaps much more depends on your understanding." Philip's expression remained steady. "I'm listening." "You are what the ancient prophecies call an A100 Prime," David began carefully. "Your genetic lineage carries specific markers that allow you to interface with forces most people cannot even perceive. The Genesee codostic observers have been watching, waiting for someone like you." "Someone like me for what?" David's voice took on the cadence of one reciting sacred text. "There is an ancient site beneath Mount Morris, a subterranean temple that houses what we call the Anvil Stone. It's not merely a relic, Philip. It's a focal point for Kodost itself, a channel through which the universal force can manifest in our world." Philip rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. The Clio Spire Guard's sudden departure northward. "They've learned of the Anvil Stone's existence. Commander Tellic believes that controlling it will give him power over the spiritual forces that flow through this land. But he doesn't understand the most crucial element." David leaned forward urgently. "The stone requires an awakener, someone with your specific genetic markers to activate its power." The implication hit Philip like a physical blow. "You're saying they need me, or someone like you. But here's what terrifies the observers. There are other A100 Primes in Genesee. If the Clio Spire Guard captures one of them, if they use coercion or mind-altering substances to force the awakening, the power could be turned toward domination instead of protection." Philip finished grimly. David nodded. "The prophecy speaks of two paths, balance or corruption, protection or conquest. The choice isn't just about who wields the power, Philip. It's about who awakens it in the first place." Philip stood and walked to the kitchen's small window, looking out at the militia members still preparing for their mission to the Bryant Center. "How long do we have?" Our observers at Stepping Stone Falls reported heavy Clio Spire Guard convoys moving toward Mount Morris this morning. Tellic isn't just exploring anymore, he's mounting a full excavation operation. "And if I don't go?" David's voice was heavy with the weight of possibility. "Then we wait and hope that Tellic doesn't find another A100 Prime willing to serve his purposes. Or we pray that his amateur understanding of codostic practices isn't sufficient to force an awakening." He paused. "Philip, the observers have spent generations preparing for this moment. We believe you're the right person at the right time with the right heart to ensure this power serves light instead of darkness." Philip turned back to face David, his decision crystallizing in his mind. "What about my sons, my family?" Al and Falcon showed remarkable ability with axes at the lumberyard, The prophecy mentions wielders, those who channel the Awakener's power through physical implements. They may have roles to play as well. Philip's protective instincts flared. I won't put my boys in danger for some ancient prophecy. Mr. Mitchell, David said gently, your boys are already in danger. The moment Tellic identified them as potential assets, they became targets. The question now is whether that danger serves a purpose worthy of the risk. Philip was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what David had revealed. Finally, he spoke with the calm authority of a man who had made difficult decisions before. If we do this, if we go to Mount Morris, what exactly are we walking into? David's relief was palpable. Unknown dangers, but with a clear purpose. The Anvil Stone has been dormant for centuries. When awakened properly, it should create a spiritual resonance that protects this land and its people, but the awakening process itself will be dangerous, extremely, and Tellic's forces will be there in numbers. Philip nodded slowly. Then we'll need more than just good intentions. He moved toward the kitchen door, then paused. David, one more question. These observers of yours, how long have they been watching my family? CODIS brought your family to our attention shortly after your return from Kalamazoo, Philip. But this isn't coincidence. Your bloodline has been preparing for this moment longer than you know. Philip opened the door, then looked back with a wry smile. Well, that explains why my father always said we were destined for something big. As they returned to the gymnasium, Philip's mind was already working through the tactical implications of their mission. He would need to convince Sergeant Stern to support an operation to Mount Morris. He would need to prepare his sons for dangers they couldn't yet comprehend. And most importantly, he would need to find the courage to accept a destiny that stretched far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The legend of the Axe of Genesee was no longer approaching. It had arrived, and Philip Mitchell stood at its center, ready or not. The Bryant Center Massacre. Location: North Flint Bryant Center, Pearson Road. The 12-vehicle convoy rolled through the abandoned streets of North Flint with military precision, their engines echoing off the empty storefronts and boarded-up houses. David Breed rode in the lead vehicle, his weathered hands checking his rifle one final time as they approached the Bryant Center. Intelligence suggested that Frank Fronton, for reasons unknown, remained at the center while the rest of the Clio Spire Guard retreated north. The convoy spread out in a tactical formation as they reached the facility's perimeter. The Bryant Center had once been a community recreation facility, but now its cheerful brick facade was marred by hastily constructed defensive positions and the ominous silence of a place where terrible things had occurred. Movement on the east wing, crackled a voice through Breed's radio. Looks like they're trying to slip out the back. Negative, Breed responded. Let them think they have an escape route. We go in hard and fast through the main entrance. The firefight was brief but intense. The remaining Clio Spire Guard forces put up determined resistance, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Within 4 minutes, the East 3rd Militia had secured the outer buildings and was advancing toward the facility's center courtyard. It was there that David Breed made the discovery that would haunt his final moments. The courtyard had been converted into something resembling a makeshift laboratory. Industrial bathtubs lined the concrete space, their porcelain surfaces stained with the remnants of a yellowish liquid that had been hastily drained. The sickly sweet chemical smell hung in the air like a funeral shroud, and the drainage pipes led directly to what appeared to be sewer manhole covers. Breed knelt beside one of the tubs, his stomach churning as the implications became clear. Holy shit, he whispered into his radio. They weren't just holding prisoners here, they were. Destroying evidence of executions came a cultured voice from behind him. Breed spun around, his rifle at the ready, to find Frank Fronton standing in the courtyard's main entrance. The Clio Spire Guard captain appeared completely at ease, his hands clasped behind his back as if he were conducting a casual inspection rather than facing numerous armed militia members. My dear David Breed, Fronton continued, his voice carrying that familiar tone of false courtesy, I do hope you'll forgive the untidiness. We've been engaged in some rather urgent housekeeping, you understand. Frank Fronton, Breed spat, keeping his weapon trained on the captain. You're under arrest for war crimes against the citizens of Genesee. Fronton's smile was predatory. Oh, my beloved militia commander, I'm afraid you've misunderstood the situation entirely. He gestured elegantly to the stained bathtubs around them. You see, we weren't simply eliminating witnesses, we were harvesting them. What the hell are you talking about? The yellowish substance you see traces of. A most fascinating alchemical compound. It seems that when properly extracted from living subjects, it can enhance certain capabilities in those with the proper genetic markers. Fronton's eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light. Commander Tellic was quite generous in sharing the benefits of his research. Breed's finger tightened on his trigger. You sick bastard. How many people did you murder? Murder? Fronton laughed, the sound echoing off the courtyard walls with an unnatural resonance. My dear boy, we were conducting scientific advancement, though I suppose from your limited perspective, the distinction might seem academic. Take 'em down, Breed shouted to his men. The East 3rd Militia opened fire simultaneously, their muzzle flashes lighting up the courtyard like deadly fireworks. But something impossible happened. Frank Fronton moved like liquid shadow, flowing between the bullets with inhuman grace and speed. His form seemed to blur and shift, as if reality itself bent around him. Before any of the militia members could reload, Fronton was among them. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. Fronton's hands moved with supernatural precision, each strike lethal, each movement defying the laws of physics. He moved through the militia formation like death personified, his enhanced abilities allowing him to anticipate and counter every tactical maneuver. David Breed found himself face to face with the captain as his men fell around him. Fronton's eyes now glowed with that same yellowish light that had stained the bathtubs, and his smile held the terrible satisfaction of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. You know, my dear David, Fronton said conversationally as he effortlessly dodged Breed's desperate rifle fire, I do so appreciate visitors. It's been frightfully dull here with just the screaming. Breed's final sight was of Fronton's hand moving toward his throat with impossible speed, the captain's face wearing an expression of theatrical regret. Please, don't take this personally, were the last words David Breed heard. Of the 12 vehicles that had entered the Bryant Center compound, only 3 managed to flee in the chaos that followed. The survivors who escaped carried with them a terrifying report. Frank Fronton had become something far more dangerous than a mere military officer. The yellowish stains in those bathtubs represented the only evidence of the execution of the prisoners the Clio Spire Guard held, evidence that would not reach the East 3rd Militia nor Genesee state authorities. Burn it down to the ground, Fronton ordered the remainder of the Clio Spire Guards, and prepare for our departure. As he looked on northward to Mount Morris, Chapter 13, The Weight of Command. WKZO News Bulletin, Early Morning Report. Good morning, Kalamazoo. This is your WKZO News Update. In a significant development, LaRon Rains, a key figure in the ongoing conflict, has been captured alive today on the outskirts of Kalamazoo. The raid was led by the 204th MM5 Kalamazoo Central Division with assistance from what sources are calling anonymous informants, believed to be connected to the Silver Domes of Yaktown. With this operation, many Jasper-aligned military factions have already begun their departure from the region, signaling what could be the final chapter of the long-standing conflict in Kalamazoo. In a separate, disturbing discovery, the remains of Byron Watson, the Kalamazoo State Auditor General, were found earlier this morning off the shores of the Kalamazoo River near Kings Highway. While the cause of death is yet to be determined, authorities are investigating the circumstances surrounding his untimely passing. Stay tuned to WKZO for further updates on these developments. This is your local news team bringing you the latest from Kalamazoo. The principal's office at Durant High School had been transformed into the East 3rd Militia Administrative Facility, though the faded motivational posters still clung to the walls, remnants of a time when the biggest concern was standardized test scores. Philip Mitchell sat across from the heavy oak desk, where Sergeant Norvell Stern had established his command office. watching as the militia leader paced behind the chair with the restless energy of a caged animal. The phone in Philip's hand felt heavier than any weapon he'd carried in Kalamazoo. Representative Hector Hayes' voice crackled through the receiver, tinged with the urgency that had become all too familiar in recent days. "Philip, I understand the gravity of what you're telling me," Hayes said, his politician's measured tone struggling to contain genuine alarm. "Mount Morris, the Anvil Stone, if Commander Tellic gets his hands on that kind of power. Then we won't have a city left to defend," Philip finished, his eyes meeting Stern's across the desk. "Hector, I need you to mobilize every resource you can. Genesee State Police, Flint Sheriff's Department, hell, call in favors from Grand Blanc if you have to." Stern stopped pacing, his weathered hands gripping the back of his chair. "Representative Hayes, with all due respect," he interjected, loud enough for the phone to pick up his voice, "we're talking about stripping Flint bare. What happens when the guard doubles back? What happens to the families we've sworn to protect?" Philip covered the mouthpiece and looked directly at the sergeant. "Norvell, if we don't stop them at Mount Mars, there won't be families left to protect." David Chen was clear once they activate that stone. "You mean that guy that just appeared in my gymnasium as sudden as an orphan on a doorstep? He's one of those mystic philosophers, Philip. Half the time they speak in riddles and the other half they're talking about forces none of us can see." Stern's voice carried the weight of a man who'd lost too many good people to trust in anything but steel and gunpowder. "This outfit just now barely has enough recruits to defend the city. You're asking me to gamble them all on a prophecy." Hayes' voice cut through the tension over the phone line. "Sergeant Stern, I have faith in the Mitchell family and Philip. He's a veteran of the Kalamazoo conflict. If he says this is the fight that matters, then it's the fight that matters. I'm authorizing emergency powers. You'll have state police backup within the hour." The office door burst open without ceremony. Lester stumbled in, his usually composed demeanor shattered. Behind him came two other militia members Philip recognized but couldn't name, young faces that had aged years in the past week. All three wore the hollow expression of men with news that could leave paradise in ruin. "Sarge," Lester's voice cracked as he spoke, "we need to talk, now." Stern straightened, reading the catastrophe written across his subordinate's face. "Go ahead, Lester. Whatever it is, we can handle it." "David Breed is dead." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that filled the small office. Philip felt the phone slip slightly in his grip as Hayes' voice became distant, asking for clarification through the receiver. He set it down gently, giving the representative a brief standby before focusing entirely on the young militiaman. "Tell us what happened, Lester," Philip said quietly, his Kalamazoo military training kicking in calm authority in the face of chaos. The youngest of the militia members wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve, leaving a streak of dirt across his face. "We hit the Bryant Center like you ordered, Sarge. 12 vehicles, just like we planned, but they were ready for us. Captain Fronten used his soldiers as fodder. He moved like nothing human, tore through our people like they were made of paper." One of the other militiamen, barely 21 by Philip's estimate, spoke up with a trembling voice. "They were cleaning up the evidence of the executions. A bunch of tubs connected to large drums of some yellowish fluid. Breed tried to make the arrest, but Fronten, he couldn't finish the sentence. Only 3 vehicles made it back," Lester continued, his military training helping him push through the trauma to deliver the report. "They burned the whole facility after our boys retreated. Whatever they were doing there, they done with it now. And Fronten, most likely heading north now, toward Mount Morris." The silence that followed was deafening. Philip watched as Stern's face transformed, the reluctant caution giving way to cold, focused rage. The sergeant's hands, which had been gripping the chair back, slowly relaxed as he came around the desk. "Private," Stern's voice had taken on the quiet intensity that his men knew meant business. "How many enhanced soldiers did you see?" "Just Fronten, but..." Lester glanced at his companions. "The way he moved, Sarge, one of him was worth 10 of us." And if they've got more of that yellow extract, Philip picked up the phone again, Hayes' voice still buzzing with questions on the other end. Hector, change your plans. We need everything you can give us, and we need it now. The enemy isn't just after the stone. They're creating super soldiers. Enhanced soldiers? Hayes' political composure finally cracked. Philip, what the hell are we dealing with here? Something that makes the Kalamazoo conflict look like a training exercise, Philip replied grimly. He looked up at Stern, who was already moving toward the wall map of the state of Genesee. Norvell, you still worried about leaving the city undefended? Stern traced the route from Flint to Mount Morris with his finger, his tactical mind already working through logistics and timing. Hell no. If we don't stop them up there, won't be a city left to defend anyway. He turned to face the room, his voice carrying the authority that had kept the East 3rd Militia together through impossible odds. Lester, get on the radio. I want every available unit ready to move in 30 minutes. Full combat load, emergency rations, and every piece of heavy equipment we've got. What about the families, Sarge? One of the younger militiamen asked. The families get their best chance if we end this at Mount Morris, Stern replied. Philip, tell Representative Hayes we'll take whatever backup he can provide, but we're not waiting for permission slips and bureaucratic approval. David Breed didn't die so we could sit in committees. Philip nodded, speaking into the phone with renewed urgency. Hector, you heard the man. Coordinate with whatever forces you can muster, but the East 3rd Militia is moving out with or without official sanction. This is bigger than jurisdictions and protocols. Hayes' sigh was audible through the receiver. Understood. I'll have state police and sheriff's deputies converging on Mount Morris within 2 hours. Philip, for what it's worth, I hope Chan's prophecy is worth the risk we're all taking. So do I, Hector. So do I. As Philip hung up the phone, Stern was already issuing rapid-fire orders to his men. The small office buzzed with activity as the reality of their situation crystallized into action. They were about to commit everything they had left to a battle that would either save Genesee or destroy them all. Sarge, Lester called from the doorway. What do we tell the men about the enhanced soldiers? Stern looked at Philip, then back at his subordinate. We tell them the truth. The enemy's got advantages we don't understand, but they bleed just like anyone else. And we tell them that David Breed and the others didn't die for nothing. They died to give us the intelligence we needed to finish this fight. Philip stood up from the chair, feeling the weight of prophecy and responsibility settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. The A100 Prime potion-making wizard turned combat veteran was about to face his greatest test, not against conventional forces, but against something that threatened the very fabric of reality in Genesee. Mount Morris, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Time to see what the Axe of Genesee really means. Outside the windows of Durant High School, the sound of engines starting and equipment being loaded echoed through the empty hallways where children had once learned about history. Now, they were about to make it. The Anvil's wait. The convoy of 82 trucks and 50 armored personnel carriers came to a halt at the base of Mount Morris, like a metal plague settling over the landscape. Commander Vors Tellic stood atop his command vehicle, surveying the abandoned coal mine entrance with the satisfaction of a predator finally cornering its prey. The morning mist clung to the mountainside, giving the weathered mining infrastructure an ethereal quality that seemed almost prophetic. Secure the perimeter, Tellic commanded, his voice carrying across the ranks of Clio Spire Guard soldiers. I want every access point covered. Nothing gets in or out without my knowledge. The mine entrance yawned before them like a mouth carved into the earth, its wooden support beams blackened with age and neglect. Rails for the old mining carts disappeared into the darkness, while rusted equipment lay scattered around the site like the bones of some industrial graveyard. Tellic descended from his vehicle and approached the mine shaft, flanked by 6 of his most trusted soldiers. Each man carried high-powered flashlights and assault rifles, their movements precise and coordinated, despite the uncertain terrain ahead. According to the historian's information, Tellic said to his sergeant, the subterranean temple should be approximately 300 meters into the main shaft, branching east toward the mountain's core. The first few minutes of descent were unremarkable. The standard detritus of an abandoned mining operation, old cables, broken machinery, and the persistent smell of coal dust and dampness. Their footsteps echoed off the rough-hewn walls as they made their way deeper into Mount Morris. But as they progressed, the industrial remnants gave way to something far older. The walls began to show tool marks that predated modern mining equipment, and strange symbols appeared carved into the stone geometric patterns that seemed to writhe in the shifting light of their flashlights. "Commander," one of the soldiers called out, his voice tight with unease. "Over here." Tellic moved toward the soldier's position and immediately understood the man's discomfort. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, far too large and carefully constructed to be a natural cave formation. Ancient stone columns supported a ceiling that disappeared into the darkness above, while the floor was paved with fitted stones worn smooth by centuries of use. And there, in the center of the chamber, sat the object of their quest. The anvil rose from the floor like a monument to forgotten craftsmanship. It was a massive rock carved from a single piece of dark stone that seemed to absorb their flashlight beams rather than reflect them. The surface was covered in intricate designs that hurt to look at directly, patterns that seemed to shift and move when viewed peripherally. "The Anvil Stone," Tellic whispered, his usual commanding tone replaced by something approaching reverence. He approached the ancient artifact slowly, extending one hand toward its surface. The moment his fingers made contact, a pulse of energy shot through the chamber. Not visible light, but something deeper, a vibration that seemed to resonate in their bones. Several soldiers stumbled, while others instinctively raised their weapons before realizing there was nothing to shoot at. "Sir," the sergeant said, his voice shaky, "maybe we should—" "We're taking it," Tellic cut him off, his hand still pressed against the anvil's surface. He could feel something stirring within the stone, like a heartbeat that had been waiting centuries to resume its rhythm. "This is what we came for. Get chains and cables from the trucks. We're moving this back to base camp." The first attempt proved the futility of human strength against the anvil's mass. 8 soldiers, working in coordinated teams, couldn't budge the artifact even an inch from its position. Sweat beaded on their foreheads as they strained against the immovable object, their efforts accomplishing nothing more than reinforcing the stone's supernatural weight. "Bring in the heavy chains," Tellic ordered, his patience wearing thin. "Connect them to Truck 7, the one with the reinforced towing package." The soldiers worked efficiently, threading heavy steel chains around the anvil's base and securing them to the truck's rear hitch. The driver revved the engine, put the vehicle in gear, and began applying steady pressure. The chains snapped with a sound like a gunshot. "Stronger chains?" Tellic barked, though he was beginning to understand that they were dealing with forces beyond conventional physics. "And get 3 more trucks in position. We'll distribute the load." It took some time to properly configure the towing arrangement. 4 trucks, positioned at different angles, with their chains connected to a central harness that wrapped around the anvil. The drivers worked in careful coordination, applying pressure gradually and evenly. This time, something gave way. The anvil moved. Not easily, it scraped against the stone floor with a sound like grinding bones, leaving deep gouges in the ancient pavement. But it moved, inch by agonizing inch, toward the mine entrance. The soldiers followed the procession in tense silence, as if they were part of some unholy funeral march. The sun was reaching its zenith when they finally dragged the Anvil Stone into the open air. The moment it crossed the threshold from underground to surface, another pulse emanated from the artifact, stronger this time, visible as a ripple in the air itself that extended outward like a stone dropped in still water. Every soldier felt it. A pressure in their skulls, a brief moment of disorientation, and then an overwhelming sense that they had just awakened something that had been better left sleeping. "Magnificent," Tellic breathed, circling the anvil as it sat in the mountain sunlight. The strange patterns on its surface seemed more pronounced now, almost glowing with their own inner light. Absolutely magnificent. "My beloved commander," came a familiar voice from behind him. Frank Fronten emerged from the tree line, his uniform pristine despite having traveled through rough terrain. His characteristic smile was firmly in place, though there was something predatory in his eyes as he gazed upon the ancient artifact. "Fronten," Tellic acknowledged without turning around. "I trust the Bryant Center cleanup went smoothly?" "Oh, delightfully smoothly," Fronten replied with mock humility. "Every trace of our operations has been thoroughly sterilized. The building is nothing more than ash and memories now. Please, don't burden yourself with such trivial concerns when you have this magnificent achievement to celebrate." Tellic finally faced his subordinate, noting the slight emphasis Fronten placed on certain words. "Any complications during the withdrawal?" "A few minor inconveniences," Fronten said with a dismissive wave. "Some local militia members who failed to appreciate our work ethic. They have since been educated about the futility of interfering with our operations." Before Tellic could respond, a sound reached them from the southern approach to Mount Morris. Vehicle engines, growing louder by the moment. A lot of vehicle engines. One of the perimeter guards came running toward them, his radio crackling with urgent reports. "Commander, multiple vehicles approaching from the south." State police markings, sheriff's department, and what looks like civilian militia vehicles. Tellic moved to higher ground, pulling binoculars from his tactical vest. Through the lenses, he could see a convoy that rivaled their own in size official government vehicles, mixed with the improvised armor of the East 3rd Militia. At the head of the column, he could make out figures that his intelligence had identified as high-priority targets. "It appears," Fronten said quietly, moving to stand beside his commander, "that our little excavation project has attracted some unwanted attention." Tellic lowered the binoculars, his hand moving instinctively to rest on the Anvil Stone surface. The moment his skin made contact, he felt it again, that pulse of ancient power, stronger now, as if the artifact was responding to the approaching threat. "Let them come," he said, his voice carrying a confidence that surprised even him. "They're too late. The Anvil Stone is ours, and with it," he paused, feeling something shift in the air around him, something that made his enhanced soldiers stand straighter and his vehicle's engines purr with newfound power. With it, everything changes. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, and Tellic could see dust clouds rising from the southern road. Whatever was coming would arrive within minutes, and when it did, the prophecy of the Axe of Genesee would finally be put to the test. The weight of destiny pressed down on Mount Morris like a storm about to break. Chapter 14. The Lineage Awakened. The dust clouds from the approaching convoy settled as the combined forces of the East 3rd Militia, Genesee State Police, Flint Sheriff's Department, and Genesee SWAT team spread across the southern approach to Mount Morris. Philip Mitchell stood in the lead vehicle, surveying the Clio Spire Guard's position through binoculars. The Anvil Stone sat in the open air like a dark monument, surrounded by Tellic's forces in defensive positions. 80-plus vehicles, thousands of soldiers. Philip reported to Sergeant Stern over the radio. "They've got the high ground, but they're spread thin trying to protect that stone." From his command position atop an armored personnel carrier, Commander Vors Tellic observed the approaching force with grim satisfaction. The Anvil Stone pulsed behind him, its ancient power seeming to respond to the coming conflict. "My beloved commander," Frank Fronten said, appearing at Tellic's side with his characteristic predatory smile, "it appears our guests have arrived in force. How delightfully predictable." Tellic's hand moved to the Tel Vallis pike at his side. The weapon seemed to vibrate with anticipation, as if it too could sense the approaching battle. "Position the enhanced units on the flanks. Standard soldiers hold the center. In Fronten, I want that stone protected at all costs." "Of course, Commander. Though I do hope our opposition provides more entertainment than those militia boys at the Bryant Center." Fronten's voice carried its usual mock courtesy, but his eyes gleamed with genuine anticipation. Philip checked his weapon one final time, then looked at his sons. Al and Falcon had insisted on being in the first wave, and despite every paternal instinct screaming against it, he knew they belonged here. This was their destiny, as much as his. Remember, Philip said quietly, we're not just fighting for Flint anymore. If David Chen was right, if the prophecy is real, then everything changes today. Al adjusted his grip on his combat axe, the same type of tool that had caught the Clio Spire Guard's attention at the lumberyard. Papa Bear, I understand about enough of this mystical gibberish to levitate a coin across the table, but I understand further that we're Mitchells. We don't quit. We adapt, survive, and keep fighting. Falcon nodded, his own axe gleaming in the afternoon sun. Whatever happens, we face it together. The radio crackled with final coordinations, SWAT teams moving to flanking positions, sheriff's deputies providing mobile support, state police establishing perimeter control. The East Third Militia, bloodied but unbroken, preparing for what they all knew would be their final stand. Sergeant Stern's voice cut through the communications chatter. All units, this is command. We move in 60 seconds. Remember, we're not just fighting for territory. We're fighting for the right to exist. On the mountaintop, Tellic raised his fist high in the air, the Tel Vallis pike gleaming wickedly in his other hand. Protect the altar, he roared across his ranks. Kill all who stand in your way. The clash was thunderous. The East Third Militia charged up the mountain slope, their vehicles kicking up clouds of dust and debris. SWAT teams advanced with precision, their tactical training evident in every movement. Sheriff's deputies and state police provided cover and fire as the combined force crashed into Tellic's defensive lines. Sparks fell like rain as metal met metal. Gunfire echoed off the mountainside, and men shouted orders that were lost in the chaos of battle. Al and Falcon moved like one entity, forged by pressure, sharpened by pain, and bound by loyalty that transcended blood. Their axes cut through the Clio Spire Guard's front lines with a fluidity that seemed almost supernatural, each brother instinctively covering the other's blind spots. Philip fought not as a soldier, but as a general guiding his sons, commanding terrain, never losing sight of the Anvil Stone that sat like a dark heart in the center of the battlefield. The East Third Militia held the flanks with desperate courage, but the Clio Spire Guard pressed harder, wave after wave of enhanced soldiers pushing forward with inhuman determination. Frank Fronten moved through the battle like a force of nature, his enhanced abilities allowing him to tear through opposition with casual brutality. How delightfully invigorating, he called out over the din of battle, his voice carrying that familiar tone of mock enthusiasm as he dispatched a SWAT officer with surgical precision. Gethin Mine fought with savage efficiency on the eastern flank, his brutal methods cutting a swath through the state police line. But as he advanced, a familiar voice rang out across the battlefield. I gotta get mine! Lester shouted, breaking from his militia unit and charging directly toward the Clio Spire Guard enforcer. The young militiaman's face was set with grim determination. This was personal. Payback for David Breed, and Philip felt it first, a tugging sensation in his chest, as if something deep within him was responding to a call he couldn't hear. Al and Falcon felt it too, their movements becoming more fluid, more precise, as if they were being guided by some invisible force. Then, without warning, a beam of bright diamond pearl erupted from the Anvil Stone. The light was blinding, shooting straight up into the sky like a pillar connecting the ground to the heavens. Every fighter on the mountain froze, shielding their eyes from the intense radiance. From within the light, a shape began to emerge, not a blade, but a fractured, crystallized core wrapped in flame, shifting form as if alive. The Axe of Genesee manifested not as a weapon of war, but as something far more fundamental, pure Kodos energy given form. The axe had no handle, no traditional edge, but it pulsed with rhythmic energy that seemed to resonate with the very heartbeat of the land itself. Philip stepped forward, drawn by an irresistible compulsion. The crystalline form flew to his hand as if summoned by the gods themselves. its weight both infinitely heavy and completely weightless at the same time. Commander Vors Tellic roared his fury at seeing the prophecy fulfilled before his eyes. His Telvalis pike extended threefold, its wicked length gleaming with dark energy as he leaped through the air with inhuman speed and strength. "The axe belongs to the strong," he bellowed, bringing his weapon down in a strike that would have cleaved a normal man in two. Philip moved to meet him, the crystallized axe shifting and flowing in his hands like liquid fire. Strike, parry. Strike, parry. The two weapons met in a clash that sent shockwaves across the battlefield. Each impact generated bursts of energy, Tellic's pike crackling with dark power, Philip's axe blazing with pure codist force. The battle around them continued, but many fighters found themselves pausing to watch the supernatural duel unfolding at the mountain's peak. Frank Fronton, observing the conflict with his usual predatory interest, suddenly found himself surrounded. Philip's sons had broken through the defensive lines and were converging on his position with deadly intent. "Oh, how delightfully dramatic," Ron said, his voice maintaining its mocking tone even as he prepared to face two opponents simultaneously. "Please, don't let me interrupt your touching family reunion." Al and Falcon attacked in perfect coordination, their axes weaving a deadly pattern that forced Fronton to give ground. The enhanced captain fought with superhuman speed and strength, but he was facing opponents who seemed to be drawing on the same mysterious force that powered their father's battle with Tellic. "You know," Fronton gasped between parries, his usual composure finally beginning to crack, "I do hope you appreciate the irony being killed by the very prophecy I helped to—" He never finished the sentence. Al's axe took him in the chest while Falcon's caught him across the throat, and Frank Fronton's long career of manipulation and murder came to an abrupt end. But the main battle between Philip and Tellic continued to rage. The Telvalis pike clashed again and again with the crystallized axe, each impact sending waves of energy across the mountainside. Tellic fought with the desperate fury of a man who saw his grand design crumbling, while Philip battled with the calm certainty of someone fulfilling his destiny. Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, both weapons met in a final, decisive clash. A flash of blinding white erupted from the point of contact. For the briefest flicker of a second, it seemed as if the entire universe paused. Philip Mitchell himself pulsed with the same energy as the axe in his hand, his entire being resonating with Kodos power as the crystalline weapon blazed with light that seemed to come from the heart of creation itself. When vision returned to the battlefield, a sergeant from the East 3rd Militia whispered in awe. He glows. All three of them, young Falcon Mitchell, stood dumbfounded at the series of events unfolding before him. Philip saw the confusion in his son's eyes and stepped forward, the axe now completely integrated with his being, its energy flowing through him like a second bloodstream. "It was never a weapon," Philip explained, his voice carrying a resonance that seemed to echo from the earth itself. "It was a lineage." Falcon looked at himself, then at Al, seeing the same ethereal glow that now surrounded his father. "Our lineage? Then it's in us?" Beaming with pride and a deep understanding that had been building for years without his conscious knowledge, Philip Mitchell answered, "It is us, Falcon." Together, the three became a force of nature. They swept through Commander Tellic's remaining A-10s and A-5s like a hurricane of righteous fury. The East 3rd Militia, SWAT teams, and state police, with no more top-ranking resistance to face, cleared the remaining A-1s with methodical efficiency. But as the smoke began to clear and the sounds of battle faded, Al turned to his father with the same sardonic humor that had carried him through juvenile detention and lumberyard work. "Where did that come from? It felt like the entire world went on a cigarette break for a second there. You and Falcon started glowing like the Christmas tree on Saginaw. What the fuck was that? What the fuck happened to the axe?" Philip smiled, the crystalline energy still flowing through him like a river of starlight. "You saw the axe manifest itself and fly to my hand. This is true, Al. But the prophecy, it seems, was not about the axe itself. It was about the bloodline that would carry the axe in its very core. That bloodline is us, son. Me, you, your children. Running his fingers through his hair, Al scowled with familiar skepticism. You want to run that by me again, Big Papa? These guys have been giving us hell for so long, I got a P.O. box next to Satan's mailbox. And you're telling me this jibber-jabber about a weapon being the defender of the state was really about me and my dick being the defenders of the state? Philip smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder with paternal affection and newfound understanding. No, son, we and our dicks are the defenders of the state. But their moment of victory was interrupted by the sound of engines approaching from the north. Commander Tellic, wounded but still alive, was attempting to retreat with his remaining forces when a new convoy appeared on the horizon. The vehicles bore the insignia of the 31st MM5 Genesee Central Division. General Drake Call had finally returned. The man who had drafted Philip Mitchell into the Kalamazoo conflict, who had left Genesee defenseless against the Clio Spire Guard, who had prioritized distant political concerns over the safety of his own people, had arrived just in time to witness the prophecy's fulfillment. Tellic's convoy found itself trapped between the victorious defenders of Mount Morris and the returning military force. There would be no escape this time. Looking down at the fallen soldiers scattered across the battlefield East 3rd, militia members who had died defending their home, state police and sheriff's deputies who had answered the call, SWAT officers who had given their lives for a cause greater than themselves, Philip felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The men of Flint hadn't voluntarily gone to Kalamazoo. They were drafted. The boys of Flint hadn't called on the Clio Spire Guard. They had responded to them, and yet still, many of his townspeople and family now lay entombed in the ash of their burning city. But they had won. The prophecy was fulfilled. The Anvil Stone secure, and the Axe of Genesee revealed not as a weapon of destruction, but as a lineage of protection that would guard the region for generations to come. The battle for Mount Morris was over. The legend of the Axe of Genesee had begun. The entire mountain erupted in celebratory cheer. Philip Mitchell retrieved a fallen Genesee state flag from the ground. Waving it in the air for all to see, he yelled, "Members of the East 3rd Militia, young ruffians of Genesee, you have given them hell, and today the day is ours. I, Philip Mitchell, hereby decree, I will spare no expense of the Mitchell family purse to do my part in making our city great again. And in honor of a city that fought so bravely, I am changing the moniker of my clan from Mitchell to Flint." The celebration continued as Philip Mitchell, with his sons in his arms, descended to the bottom of Mount Morris. They went up Mount Morris as the Mitchells. They came down Mount Morris as the Flints, the Axe of Genesee. Epilogue New Foundations. 1979 CE. Second Y-Clan. The morning fog rolled across the northern border of Portadoux Province, where the city of Scotty sat nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. Philip Flint, he still had to remind himself of the name change, stood on the porch of his 4-story estate, watching the sun burn through the mist as he sipped his coffee. He intended to buy property in the city of Finkel Acres, but with no suitable lodgings available for purchase, they settled in the city of Scotty. It wasn't the old Mitchell estate back in Genesee, but it was theirs, peaceful, safe, and far enough from the memories of Mount Morris to let a man sleep without dreams of crystalline axes and fallen comrades. It turns out that Rand Electronics is the family company of Doyon and Ruby Jean, owned by their father, Douglas Rand. Al emerged from the house, already dressed in his Jasper military fatigues. At 22 Wycliffe, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd faced the impossible and lived to tell about it. The faint coldest glow that had marked him since the battle was barely visible now, more of a subtle aura that people noticed without quite understanding why. "Morning, Papa Bear," Al said, accepting the cup of coffee Philip handed him. Falcon's already down at the recruitment office. Kid's more excited about this than he was about Christmas morning when he was 10. Philip smiled. His youngest son had taken to military life like a fish to water, much to everyone's surprise. The same intuitive fighter who'd once brawled his way through juvenile detention now channeled that energy into tactical training and unit cohesion. "Any word from Dan?" Philip asked. "Got a letter yesterday," Al replied, pulling a folded envelope from his pocket. "Flint Cares is up and running. They've rebuilt 3 city blocks already, and the hedge funds are performing better than expected. He says the insurance settlements from the Clio Spire Guard damages are helping, but most of the funding is coming from." Al paused, grinning. What did he call it? Mysterious philanthropic sources with deep pockets and excellent taste in cities. Philip chuckled. Dan had always been the diplomat of the family, able to make even Philip's guilt-driven generosity sound like shrewd business planning. And the nonprofit work? Expanding beyond reconstruction. Medical clinics, job training programs, support for militia families who lost breadwinners. Al's expression grew more serious. Sergeant Stern's been helping coordinate with the East 3rd Militia veterans. A lot of good people who need help getting back on their feet. The sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted their conversation. A military truck rounded the corner, bearing the insignia of the 194th MM5 Port Doe West Division. Behind the wheel sat a familiar figure, Lieutenant Doyon Rand, now sporting the confident bearing of an officer who'd earned his rank through merit rather than connections. "Philip, Al," Doyon called out as he parked. "Hope you don't mind the early visit, but I've got news." "Let me guess," Philip said, walking down to meet them. "General Vors finally approved the enlistments?" "Approved and expedited," Doyon confirmed with a broad grin. "Al and Falcon report to St. Gregory's next Monday, and I get the privilege of being their immediate commanding officer." Phil nearly choked on his coffee. "You're kidding. They're putting the guy who saved my life in Vandercook in charge of my boys?" It was strange, Philip reflected, how normal moments like this could feel so precious after everything they'd been through. "There's something else," Doyon said, his tone becoming more serious. "General Vors wanted me to pass along a message. There have been disturbances on the east side of the province. Nothing like the Clio Spire Guard, but unusual enough that Central Command is paying attention." Philip felt a familiar stirring, the subtle awareness that had become part of him since Mount Morris. Somewhere in the distance, Kodos was moving again. Not urgently, not threateningly, but with the steady patience of a force that understood the long view of history. The kind of disturbances that might require people with our particular skills? Phil asked quietly. "Possibly," Doyon admitted. "But not immediately. For now, Al and Falcon are just soldiers in training. Whatever comes next, you'll face it with proper preparation and support." Philip nodded, understanding the unspoken message. The Axe of Genesee, the lineage, the responsibility would always be part of them, but they didn't have to face it alone anymore. As the morning wore on and their visitor prepared to leave, Falcon returned from the recruitment office with paperwork in hand and excitement radiating from every pore. "It's official," he announced. "Monday morning, we become the lowest-ranking members of the 194th MM5 Port Doe West Division. Lowest-ranking members who happen to glow in the dark and carry the mystical protection of an entire region," Al added dryly. "Details," Falcon replied with a grin. That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Philip raised his glass of locally made wine. "To new beginnings," he said. "To the friends who stood with us, the family we've built, and the legacy we'll leave behind." "To the Flints," Al added, his voice carrying both pride and the weight of memory. "To the Flints," they echoed. Outside, the evening stars began to appear over Scone, their light reflecting off the calm waters of the northern lakes. Somewhere to the north, the city of Flint was rebuilding, stronger and more resilient than before. The East 3rd Militia had been formally recognized and funded as a regional security force. The Genesee Cadastic observers continued their ancient watch, now with the knowledge that the prophecy had been fulfilled in the best possible way. And in a joy-filled house on the northern border of Port-Doe province, three men who had once been Mitchells and were now Flints prepared for whatever challenges the future might bring, secure in the knowledge that some things, family, loyalty, and the willingness to stand against the darkness would never change. The legend of the Axe of Genesee had ended. The story of the Flint family had just begun.